Yeah, I see.
Look right.
That's what it is.
And then, you know,
Stuck in.
sit.
All right.
All right, you guys all ready to go? Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Brighton Area Schools Board of Education Special Meeting Workshop. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Ms. Hackerman, roll call, please.
Mr. Storm?
Here.
Dr. Krebs?
Here.
Ms. Reed?
Here.
Mr. Conley?
Here.
Mrs. Marks?
Here.
Mr. Trombley?
Here.
Mr. Myers?
Here. All right, that takes us to the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Krebs,
Support.
supported by Ms. Reed. Any discussion?
I have a question. I have two things that are a little time sensitive. Probably I'd rather do them next week, but they had a parent ask me to talk about it tonight. How could I do that? Later in the meeting, you want to do it later?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously our workshop is more of an open-ended discussion, so I would say we have an opportunity at the end with time allotted.
It's important. Thank you.
And then I guess just in the context of the email exchange we shared, I'm assuming there will be time tonight where I'll be able to share that outside of this particular part of the agenda when we get into more of the dialogue around how we ultimately work. As a new member of the board, Roger, I want to abide by the guidance of our fearless leader.
Well, it's not necessarily just my guidance.
Well, you're the one that
It's-
keeps me on the straight and narrow. That's your role.
Part of what, and obviously part of our conversation tonight will be, the process for moving things forward. So maybe even in the context of that, we can have, further discussion about that.
Just want to make
as an
sure that
example.
if we move past this portion of the agenda, at the end, I said, well, when can I talk? You
Sure.
really should have brought it up at the beginning.
I understand. Yeah,
Okay.
no problem.
So later.
Yes.
Perfect.
Kind of same boat on that. So, okay. That way you can run your meeting.
Okay. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any nays? That passes 7-0. That moves us to the call to the public. If you are here this evening and would like to address the board, there are cards at the back of the table. You will have 3 minutes to address the board. When 30 seconds is left in your time, Ms. Marks will give you the yellow card, and when your time is up, she will give you a red card. As of right now, I only have one card. Eva Helmanen. Ms. Helmanen?
Hi, Eva Hellman, Brighton Lake Road. My son Zach's at Brighton High School. Just wanted to follow up on the last couple meetings that I've come to talking about the boys' locker rooms at Brighton. Since I was here last, we've gotten some parents together, the coaches together, and 3 board members showed up to tour the locker rooms with us and talk about what we wanted to do. John Thompson said to me he was meeting with Mark Schaefer, which he says he did. We're waiting for a follow-up on exactly what was discussed, and we'd like to meet him. Mark Schaefer, by the way, for those of you that don't know, is the owner of the rink, and we've also talked with the gal who is going to help us with the design work from what's the name of that? T2, and she's going to move forward with that. So. Thanks to those of you who showed up. I'm hoping that by the end of the week, I'll have some more information from John Thompson and be able to share with Mark Schaefer our thoughts and get everybody together. So if anybody else is interested that wants to know what we're discussing, just let me know and we'll move forward from there. But thanks for your time.
Thank you. All right. Since there are no other cards, that will close the call to the public portion of our agenda and will move us into our workshop. As everyone knows, we have Dr. Rod Green here this evening to lead us in the discussion of the topics that we've provided everyone with regard to the governance and the roles and responsibilities of the board and talk about our structure and the committees and meetings and obviously all the information that was provided. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Green and let him
Thank you.
kick it off.
Thank you. Nice to meet everybody, and I think I've introduced myself to everybody, but my name is Rod Green, and I am a consultant with Michigan Association School Board. Most of the board knows me, except for probably the two new ones, Andy and Jennifer, but I was a superintendent for many years and an administrator in Michigan schools, and then the last 10 years, which is hard for me to believe that I've been doing this for 10 years, I've been actually helping boards with their governance and training needs and also training superintendents in regard to some things. So let's just get started, and I'll ask you to just, wait, I thought we had this on. Here we go. Let's try that. Okay. So what would you say the purpose of the board is? This is going to be a little bit of a flowing conversation here, but what would you say the purpose is? I'll give you one thought. Andy, what do you think? What's one thought?
Governance and policy?
Okay. Alicia?
Providing direction to the superintendent on how the district should run.
Excellent. Jen?
I would say guidance.
Okay. Roger?
I think governance is the best single word.
Okay. How about Bill? How about you?
Follow the laws.
Oh, all right. Good one. John?
How much of it do you want?
Just one thing.
Revised school code, general power school district, which is what we are, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. General Power School District has all the rights and powers and duties expressly stated in this act. Exercise and power implied or incident to a power expressly stated in this act, except otherwise provided by law. Educating pupils, cause public education service to be provided for pupils. It's all about education, providing for the safety and welfare of pupils. It's a nice thing that everybody needs to read.
Okay.
And
Very good.
it's a well-written document that's been in law
And so it's
since
only-
1976.
It's only 323 pages, right? School code, have you had a chance to check?
This is a shorter one. This is the MCL and the compiled laws regarding the responsibilities
So
of.
if you look it up, if you put in
Yep.
revised school code of Michigan,
Yep.
you'll see the whole thing will come up. It's 323 pages. What John was reading is the first part, the general powers. And what general powers means is that you not only have the powers that are expressly written in the statute, but you have powers that are not prohibited that were in the statute. Before 1996, some of us were still around, right? We used to be a second-class district or a third-class district, and you only had the powers that were in the statute. So now we're at general powers, and that happened in 1996.
76.
1996.
Really?
General powers.
Okay, because it says
So,
here,
Angela,
Governance and same policy.
okay, all right. So those are some good ones, and I'm going to go over some of the purposes of the board in just a second, but I wanted to start with how are you granted authority? So John just stole my thunder a little bit, but I'm going to just say you're granted authority by the school code. That's what grants the school board the authority to run the school district. So here's the little bit of on the PowerPoint here that you have the authority to exercise power incidental or appropriate to the performance or function basically of your public schools. And so, of course, in the law, the board is elected by the community, and then once you're on the board, then the board has this authority. So the business that the board is authorized to perform should be conducted at public board meetings in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. Now, that was 1976. And of course, you guys are familiar with the Open Meetings Act. This meeting is open to the public. And of course, no act of the board is valid unless it is authorized at a meeting of the board by a majority vote of the board. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Now, you have a policy in your district that it just actually says this exactly. And I'll show you the policy. And I don't know, I sent this to Matt to pass out. Did you pass out the policies?
You said that you were going to do that. I passed this part out.
Okay, all right. So we can get to the policies, but I asked for two policies. One of them is 2101. The general powers reside within the board as a whole, not individual board members. who individually lack any supervisory management authority over any district employee or agent. The board only speaks through its minutes and resolutions. This is out of your policy. So that follows the school code. So as the way it works, the hierarchy of how you get authority, you're granted authority by the school code, and then you set policies to govern the district. So that's kind of how that works. Now, let me just talk a little bit with that introduction. One of the things about being a good governance team is forming a team. You know, and you guys have probably seen this slide before in your walk of life. It's Tuckman, and he actually has the idea that when you have new members on your team, you're forming. So Andy asked a question, John asked a question, you're forming the protocols and the things that go on. You might have some power struggles, you might have some storming, but then hopefully as you keep working together, you're going to get into the norming and then the performing stages. So this is what you're going through as a new team. And obviously you have a superintendent, you have other team people here that are reporting to the superintendent, and the superintendent reports to the board. But this one big concept here is that you are a team. That's one big concept. And obviously you're coming from different walks of life. You know, I don't know what all of your backgrounds are, but I'm sure they're not the same. And so that's the idea, is to form a team, to have your own common purpose. Now, so we talk about governance. So let me just give you this thought on governance. There's 4 big things in terms of a framework for governance. And one of them would be this idea of unity of purpose. You're all on the same page, you're all trying for the same end result, right? The focus. Then the other one would be roles and responsibilities. How do you work with your different roles? What does the board do? What does the administration do? Things like that. What about your culture? Do you have a positive culture? Are you collaborative? Are you working together? Do you hold each other accountable? Do you have norms? And then the last thing is the protocols, the processes. You know, when I was a superintendent, one of the things I told my team, there's 3 big things I want you to keep in mind. Process, process, process. That's what we need. We need to have good process. And so that's important for a good governance team. Now, I want to give you a little overview of this presentation. I'm going to give you a little of this theory at the beginning, and then we're going to get the voices in the room and start discussing some of these factors. So let me just do that real quick. So of course, everybody knows what unity of purpose is, right? Just having some common goals, some things about, you know, helping children learn and transcending their differences to become all they can be, right? That type of thing. So you've got that going on in your school district. And of course, as you continue with that common purpose of helping your community and helping your children, what are your different roles? How does that work together? What does the board do? What does the administration do? And so I want to ask you a question as you go through. Do you have an idea of what a representative board is or what a governing board is? Has anybody heard this before? What's a representative board? Example would be the legislature, right? Why are they a representative? They're a representative because they have different districts. So we have a representative that goes to Lansing, you know, other towns have that, right? But we don't do it that way. We are a governing board. Because why? Because you have the whole district. So you don't represent the lakes, and you don't represent the downtown, and you don't represent the farming, you know, that's not how it works, right? So you guys are a governing board, not a representative board. Now, what does that mean if you're trustees of the district? You know, what if people came to your board meeting and said, we need new band uniforms, right? So if you're thinking like, well, hey, those are people from my community, I represent those people, then we need to do that. Or do you have to look at the whole? And this is just like you did with your bond issue and some other things. You look at the whole and what can you afford and what can you do, right? And then you do it as trustees. So a trustee ultimately protects the district, but also represents the people. So that's the idea of that. Does that make sense? So you can both be a representative of the community, but you can also be a trustee of the district. You are really entrusted with this district. Now, what's the different roles and responsibilities? So this slide, you may have seen this slide before. This slide is really kind of talks about the board being a strategic governing body as compared to the administration being more tactical, and then the teachers and staff are actually on the ground. So sometimes people will use the press box example, like the board is the owner in the press box overseeing the field, the teachers and the administrators are on the field with the students type thing. So you're not really the ones that are doing the work on the ground. So if you look at this, you look at the board, it's the 50,000 foot view. It's seeing the whole organization and how the parts relate. You know, it's actually representing the community, of course, looking a little longer term, having an overall structure for district goals, and then setting these targets for improvement. So that's the board's kind of thing, whereas the administration is not quite as high up. They're closer to the ground. They're a little bit less years ahead. They're overseeing the schools and departments and how those work together. And then, of course, they are deploying the plans that are determined for the school improvement. And then, of course, the people on the ground, these are the ones that are doing the work right there with the kids. They're overseeing their own classroom. They're only looking days, weeks ahead. And they are doing that detailed work to make those improvements at the ground level.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Who came up with that?
You know, I think that is from MASB. I'm not sure where that is exactly from. I don't see a citation on it, but I got it from MASB.
I'm just curious.
I've seen it before in terms of other organizations with that idea of strategy versus tactical versus on the ground. So the board is not on the ground, that's for sure. The board is the governing board overseeing the whole organization. So just looking at this for some details, this is your policy 101. So the board is a governing body, it's not employees or individual managers. The policy delineates the respective responsibilities of the superintendent in regard to the board will concern itself with the broad questions of the district's operation, including the establishment of goals and objectives, but it's on governance, not management. The superintendent will apprise the board of the implementation of the policies and the goals and recommend changes as needed. And the board is employing the superintendent as the chief executive to whom it delegates the administration within the parameters set by the board. So this is your own policy, and that's kind of sets the stage for what does the board do and what does the superintendent do. Let me get into that for a second. This is one other policy that the authority of the board and the individual members, all authority resides within the board as a whole, not individual board members who individually lack any supervisory or management authority over any district employee or agent. The board itself only speaks through its minutes, its resolutions. And that's right from your policy. And then, of course, within that framework, since the board is the only employee who reports, or excuse me, the superintendent's the only employee that reports to the board and reports to the board as a whole, questions and complaints and things should be directed through the administration through that chain of command. So this is kind of the starting point for how you govern as a board. One of the big tricks to this game that we're in is how to get the board to work as one voice. So I was in a district not too long ago, and the superintendent was talking to somebody, and she said, you know, I have 7 bosses, you know. And I heard her, and she hung up, and I said, you don't really have 7 bosses, you have 1 boss, and that's the board. And the whole trick is to try to get the board to work together, to listen to the various voices, come together for one purpose. That's the game of being superintendent and being a board. So, yeah, questions?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. I mean, I respect the intent, Rod, of what you're communicating and one, appreciate the fact you're taking time to come in and mentor and coach the board. Just for the record, say this publicly, I think that the beauty part of this board, to your point of the fact that we're all voted into these positions by members of the community, is the fact that as I have had an opportunity to interact with everyone on the board, we are very different and we have very different viewpoints and different ideas, different perspectives, different life experiences. And I personally don't think that it's a bad thing that we are different. I think at times, especially in today's society, we're all being pushed to think the same way. And again, public meeting, this is on the record. I think that the beauty of America is that we enjoy freedom of speech and we enjoy freedom and liberty to share our thoughts, our opinions, and our ideas in a forum like this, to get involved in public service like this. I do not think that we should all think, behave, or act as a
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that what you need to do is come together to speak as one voice to direct the district. So you might have different opinions, but as you work together, you're gonna ferret that out and work on that and then say, all right, this is the direction we're going in. And that's the trick of governance. You're an individual, but you have to come together. So that's the point of that. And your different opinions are valued and they should be there. And so, and especially new people that are coming in with that new perspective, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's not what I'm saying. So just keep that in mind as we go through.
Okay.
Now, so these are the things that you guys were kind of saying earlier when I said, what's the purpose of the board? So somebody said this one. What, Jennifer, was it you or was it Alicia? Vision, direction, right? So of course, that is the board's. And of course, we want the board to provide direction for the administration to, to hit the goals or whatever it is. So obviously you're going to have the core beliefs of the community try to come through with that direction. So that's the board's job, but the superintendent's job is to support the board, to advise the board, and to engage with stakeholder groups and things like that. So remember, you're kind of working together on this, but the board ultimately sets that direction. So that's one. And then goal setting is the same kind of thing. So the direction is a bigger, broader thing than goal setting, but certainly we want to translate that vision into long and short-term goals. So that's the board's job to do that with assistance and advising from the administration. So you're not doing this stuff in isolation. Remember, of course, you're representing the community, so you have stakeholders that are talking to you, you have constituents, people that talk to you, of course. But you also have professional advisors here that advise you. And we expect that to advise the board on things that are happening at the ground level. So we want to make sure these long-term and short-term goals are aligned to the vision, and the plan is there for implementation. And then for our progress reporting, we expect the superintendent to report the progress of these goals to the board. The board is not going to do the work of the goals. You see what I mean? The board is not on the ground doing the work. So you set the goals, but then you have to have progress reports to hear. Now, the same thing with policy. It's the same thing. These are all similar. The board sets the policy, of course, and you're trying to be consistent with law. Who said law? Bill did. You have to follow laws. You have to follow and ensure. One of your jobs too is to ensure that there's a system for implementation of the policies. So we want Matt and his team to be implementing what the board has set. But we also expect the superintendent to advise the board on policy development. So if there's a policy that is coming forth, we would expect to toss it to the superintendent and say, how will this affect the schools? How does this affect the staff? What are we doing here? And then that comes back to the board for the actual creation of the policy. And of course, we expect superintendents to create the procedures to implement the policies. So all of your policies, as simple as they may seem, it takes work to make sure they get implemented at the ground level. So that's one of the jobs of the administration. On these other ones, it's the same kind of thing. Yes.
Going back to policy, what happens if the policy is broken?
So that needs to be reported and try to figure out what the failure is, if it's a system failure or if it's an actual person that's not following the policy.
So under policy, though, there are no guidelines as to what happens if policy is broken, right?
Yeah, so.
So it's just like, oh, they broke the policy, big deal.
Well, actually, there would be, yeah, there should be.
Well, give me an example then, if it's
Well, there
not.
might be discipline. If someone broke a policy,
Okay.
the staff member might be disciplined. So it does go up the chain, but the breaking of policy is probably happening at the ground level. And then that needs to be reported to the administrator, and then it needs to be corrected. And then if there's punishment or discipline, that would.
But my point is, there's no guidelines for punishment. So one punishment from one administrator could be a different punishment compared to another administrator.
Well, it could be, but what you expect in a district like this is you would expect that to come to the central office, and then those discipline procedures are consistent throughout. So like in my size district, which was similar, with 6,000 students, you know, I had 3 assistant superintendents, and I had people, but if something happened like that, it would get brought up to our level, we would review what happened, and then we would make the decision to be consistent across the district. Yeah.
On that, then, if it's determined that things are going on that are actually breaking the law, can the board support anything that breaks the law?
Can the board support anything that breaks the law? I mean, normally, no, you're not gonna want to support breaking the law.
What's the
So that
penalty?
has to
What's the
be
penalty?
defined.
What's the penalty if they did?
Well, some penalties are
None.
in the law, some penalties are in the law and some are not. But basically, if it's a policy, there's no penalty other than discipline, you know, for their not following policy. All employees are required to follow the policies of the district. And so if they do not follow them, then they can be dealt with if it's needed.
If I could jump in just to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. I mean, there are policies at different levels and violations at different levels. And I think our board policies have provisions within them that address what happens when we board members don't follow the policy and how we can address that as a board together.
What are those? Can you
I don't remember the,
point us to where that would be, or? are
I
you
don't remember
familiar
which
with that?
number it is. I
Sometimes
know I've looked at
you
it
have a
recently,
code of
but
conduct in your board bylaws.
I think
You do have a code of conduct, and so, but a lot of times the punishments are not outlined, it's
That's
just
my
that
point.
the board
but
is
it-
supposed to follow.
right, and our policy says that if the board wants to take disciplinary action against one of its own members, it has to be discussed at the board table and voted on by the board. So there's a mechanism, even if there isn't a schedule of, you put this on blue paper when it was supposed to be red, that's this penalty. I mean, we don't have that at the board table, but there are disciplinary measures in student handbooks for student behavior that we approve here at the board table. There are mechanisms for discipline for staff and administrators that are in their contracts that we also approve here at the board table. So we have, from my perspective, we have insight into and governance over those measures.
And the other thing on that is that some of that is day-to-day work. Like if someone is late to school, you know, that's possibly breaking their contract or breaking the work rules. You know, the administration is gonna deal with that. But that's not gonna come up to the board level. So you're gonna expect your administration to have work rules and employee rules and contracts and things that they follow. And then if those are not followed, then they take measures such as progressive discipline and things like that along with due process.
So what about, okay, so that's on the teacher level and moving up. So then what happens if an administrator breaks board policy?
Be the same thing, they would have to be dealt with at the next level.
What's the next level then? The board?
The superintendent would handle all the administration.
Okay.
Now, if you look at like budget, it's the same kind of thing. Again, the board is not doing the budget in isolation. It's not gonna be, Jennifer, somebody's gonna say to you, hey, can you figure out the cost of the teachers and let us know what that would be? No, you don't do the work. You approve the work. And so we expect Mike and his team to recommend, administer policies that are related to the creation of the budget, but also develop, analyze, prep the budget, monitor the implementation of the budget, all of that. But of course, the board approves the budget. So you have obviously, you do that, you do it in June, you might do an amendment coming up, I don't know. But that's the combo between the board and superintendent. And it's the same thing with the program. We would expect if you're developing a big new program that's gonna go on, you're gonna need to have board approval. It's not gonna be something that's gonna just come out of the blue and, you find out later that this is what's happening. And then, of course, the superintendent is one of your big hires, right? The board is charged with hiring the superintendent. So you hire the person, you also should establish some policies and some guidelines or the expectations for the work, and then you evaluate the person. So you're doing that. But from his point of view, he has to implement the vision, work toward meeting the goals, oversee all of the district operations, work with the board on various things, and then, of course, work on his own professional growth. So we expect some things from the superintendent, even though the board, this is the one person that they're hiring in conjunction with being the CEO of the district. Now, another one is the staff. So I've heard discussion about the staff before, and so I'm going to ask the question, why does the board have to approve professional staff? Do you know? Obviously you do it, you approve the professional staff, certified staff. Do you know why? Some people say sometimes, well, it's in the budget. The answer is, it's in the school code. The school code requires the board to approve all certified staff. So that is your job to approve the certified staff. It's the administration's job to vet and recommend and figure out references, committees, interviewing, those kinds of things are the day-to-day work, whereas the board's job is to approve the certified staff. Yes?
Well, on that topic, we've never interviewed any people we've hired.
Right, because that's not your job. Your job is to approve. The administration's job is to do the interviewing, the vetting, the reference checks, that type of thing. That's the day-to-day work. Your job is the school code work, if that makes sense. And I know that's a topic, so I'm going to move on from that at the moment because there's some other things that we want to cover. And the last couple are facilities, which is, of course, the boards. When you guys did a bond issue a few years ago, it came to the board. But what did we expect? We expected the superintendent to analyze, to make recommendations, to have professionals that are helping the board figure out what is it that we want to do. But the board ultimately approved it, right? You guys, a lot of you were on the board at that time. And then the last one is the community. We expect the board to be the liaison between the community and the district. And so we certainly expect you to be responsive to community needs and to think about, what does the community want? But we also expect the superintendent to keep people informed and to have the policies and procedures out there so people can get it. So this is the big theory, and I'm just about done with this portion, and I want to go into a couple more things and then I'm going to stop. But I want to talk about norms for a second. So remember, I was on the 4 big things of the governance framework, right? Remember what they were? One was unity of purpose, and then you've got, the roles. So we just did those 2. The next one is norms. So what does a good governing framework have? It has norms. So obviously, you guys know what norms are, but what are some norms that you might want to have? So you guys just talked about a couple of norms earlier, but I'm going to say a few of these. These are samples. So like one would be assuming positive intent. You all are here representing the community, trying to do the best for these kids. I have no doubt about that. So hopefully we can assume that as we go forward. How about coming and being prepared and present? Of course, that's a good one. How about starting any times on time, any meetings on time? Of course, we would like to do that. Work as a team, treat each other with respect, challenge the ideas, not the person, right? Don't bully people. Be respectful, professional to people. No surprises to people. Now, how does that go with Andy's thing of, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that? There's techniques to not surprise each other with your work. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. There are techniques to do that. So I'm not saying be stifled. I'm not saying that. I'm saying be respectful of each other. And then, of course, the positive image. Of course, we want a positive. I think we all want that, don't we? We want a positive image of the district. And what if one board member is acting out? You know, directing staff or berating staff. I mean, you had mentioned, like, what do you do if they're breaking the code of conduct? That's a question that maybe should be answered by the board. Like, how do we want to roll? And I'm not going to answer that right at this moment. I'm just pointing it out that that's something to think about for your norms. How do you expect people to behave? And then, of course, now my next slide, I'm going to ask you, what norms are important to you? What do you think you should have as norms, as a group? So what are your thoughts? I put a couple of them up there. I don't know. I'll start with you, Andy. What do you think?
I think looking at the state of politics in our country, irregardless of where you fall in the political spectrum, there's a pretty big disconnect between the norms that are on this sheet relative to governing bodies and representative bodies and what's here.
Yeah.
So
Good.
That's
All
my
right,
thoughts.
thanks. Anyone else? What do you like, Alicia?
Well, I'd just like to build on what Andy has said so far tonight. I mean, I think it's important for us to bring our different talents and views to the board table and work together to set the priorities and goals for the district and for the administration, to be responsive to the things that we're hearing from the community, responsive to the recommendations and thoughts of our administration, and to work together to set priorities. Because we have finite resources. Our superintendent only has so many hours in the day that he can put on projects and work. So if we spread him too thin, we don't get quality work, just like I don't get quality work out of my coworkers at the office if we're all spread too thin. And I would hope that we can each in this very turbulent time find a way to have those conversations here at the board table in that respectful manner, but in a thorough way. I mean, I don't say respectful to suggest that we're all going to agree with each other or should expect to agree with each other all the time. But because we are all here to ensure that the Brighton area schools are the best that they can be and provide the best education for our students and the best resources for our community that we can, surely we can talk about those shared goals and experiences and come up with a path forward that utilizes our finite resources to the best of our ability and for the best effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, and what I hear you saying, Alicia, the goals, yes, absolutely. And goals isn't as much of a norm as it is a direction. So you're saying, but here's what the norm that you said.
But that's how we get there.
but
You know,
your
it's
norm was
that we're going
talking to each other,
right.
respectful, listening to each other. That was your norms to get to here. That's and so those kinds of things, as you think about that, if this is your goal here, having some goals, having some direction, you might need to set some special meetings or workshops with your superintendent to where you can have these discussions about the big picture, whatever you're working on. But that's what the norm is that we're going to do it in a respectful manner. We're going to listen to each other, that type of thing. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, and that we're going to do it here at the board table,
Yes.
so that our community can share in the knowledge of what it is we're doing and what it is we care about and the issues that we are raising, and that our administration can walk away knowing what it is we expect of them as a collective board. Since none of us can act individually, we have to act collectively here at the table.
All right, I like it. What else? Any other ones? I mean, I put a few examples on here. You actually said about 3 of them right there. But there's all kinds of norms you can think about doing. I do think that respect is a good one. Just listening to each other, and that working as a team, I think. Anything else?
Real quickly,
Yeah.
Dr. Outlaw, regarding the agenda, how are we doing for time relative to the agenda?
We're good. I've got it right here.
I'm-
Boom. We're right
Yes,
on.
we're on track.
We're on-
Yep.
we're good.
Okay, then I can
I
talk.
just have a couple more and then I'm gonna get.
It means there's time. So,
Yes.
so I would throw in that, you know, we may seem that we don't get along, but I'll tell you, the output is what the key is for me. Some days it is that way, but I think the interest of the board in creating a better place for students is clear to me at 100%. So we've done some really neat things together, this board has. And I think sometimes we forget to celebrate those successes. Okay, as we move forward into the next term with new board members, you want to, you know, we don't want to start from scratch again. You want to stay where you were plus some. So I think that goes back to just kind of working as a team and working in Andy's thought processes and maybe Mrs. Marks as well, because that's going to be the respect side. So I think that could be a norm that should be in place. But I would suggest, though, the success of the school system has been pretty good in tough times.
Absolutely.
And we need to continue that and just keep inching up and not have to fall back. I guess that's my goal, is to just keep moving up.
All right. So the next one is protocols. So remember, we still are on the 4 governance framework. So we had unity of purpose, we had roles. We talked about norms. Now we're just talking about protocols. And this is where we kind of get into the next section of the meeting, Andy, where, of course, if you're going to be a successful district, you're going to have protocols. You can't just be flying on the seat of your pants, and you guys all know that. So some of the things to think about for protocols are things like, do you do a orientation for your new members coming in? So I don't know, Jennifer, did they do a little orientation for you? Did you feel like you got orientated?
I think so. I mean,
Okay.
this is part of it.
All right, yeah. Well, this is part of it. That's exactly right. And this is the development part too. So of course you want to bring new people in and kind of get them oriented a little bit. You've got to have some protocols on communication. So what does Matt provide? You know, how does it work with information requests and things like that? How do you handle complaints from the community? You know, and I've got some, I can talk about that a little bit, but you need protocols for dealing with it. What about, what's confidentiality versus transparency? Of course, we want to be transparent. Just like you said, the community should see what we're doing. On the other hand, there are some things sometimes that need to be confidential. So can we trust that? Of course we can. Now, the annual board calendar idea is a little bit of a way, Andy, to kind of speak to your thought about bringing stuff up. So something comes up and you want to talk about it. And I don't know what you were talking about for later. Of course, that's fine. But the idea of an annual board calendar is you have that on the agenda. And when board members, the board president might say, does anybody have anything for the board calendar? And this is at the end of a board meeting, John. So this is kind of where you were just at. So this is a protocol that you might do. I'm just giving you a suggestion here. Obviously, this is your thing. But you say, does anybody have anything for the board calendar? And then that's, Matt, you've got a little calendar that you've set up for the big things that are coming up for the board. And so then you get these occasional comments that are needing to be talked about, and you see if that could possibly go on a future agenda, or if it needs to be vetted by the administration or whatever. So it's a way to deal with items on the board calendar. Now, of course, you can always talk to the superintendent other times too. So I'm just saying there's protocols for dealing with things that might come up out of, you know, it's not on the agenda, so how do I bring it up? That was the original thing I heard. Now, I want to talk a little bit about public comment, and after this, I'm going to get into, I think the next thing is committees, but should the board respond to public comment? How does it work as a board? Is this a rhetorical question, or you want me to answer? I can answer if you want. So I'm gonna start my answer with, there's 2 types of public comment. Do you know this? Have you ever heard this before? There's only 2 types. It's either on the agenda or it's not on the agenda. That's the only kind of public comment that you'll ever get. If it's on the agenda, shouldn't you talk about it when it's on the agenda? So somebody comes up here with something and it's going to be talked about as you go down through the agenda. talk about it on the agenda, right? If it's not on the agenda, how do you know all of the information? How do you talk about it as a board, discuss it, and then decide what the response is gonna be, and then have the board president respond? You cannot do it, it's impossible. So when something's not on the agenda, you need to, and this is what I wrote here years ago, this portion of the agenda is for citizens to address any questions or comments to the board. The board will listen, take comments and questions under advisement, and not respond at this time. The presiding officer will refer questions for superintendent research and response. So the idea, of course, is you are hearing people. This is their time to speak. But you cannot possibly, as a governing board, listen to that comment, formulate a response, and respond. It's just impossible.
Why is it impossible?
Because you'd have to talk as a board, you'd have to take time out of the agenda to discuss the issue, you'd have to ask for more information from the superintendent, you'd have to make sure you have all the information, and then you'd have to take the time to discuss it, then you'd have to take the time to come up with an answer, and then you'd have to answer it. And it's not doable in a public meeting.
Isn't it dependent on what the issue is?
Well, not usually. If it's not on the agenda, usually it's going to be impossible to get all of the information. Now, certainly there's a simple question that could be asked, like, what time does the football game start on Friday night? You know, I mean, is that really what we're doing, or do we have a protocol where we're listening, taking the question under advisement, and not responding? And here's what I think the next thing is that the next day, or even after the meeting, the superintendent or whoever should be reaching out to that person, getting the rest of the information, and then resolving the issue, and then should be closing the loop with the board.
Do we do that in this district?
There's different ways we can do that. I mean,
Do we do what he just articulated in this district?
we do when many of the public comments, there are times when at the very end, the president will ask me to respond to it, and it's something I might quickly respond to. If it's just a general question or if there's a clarification. If it's something back to the board for action, we would do exactly what you're talking about. We would take it under advisement. We would do some research. I would probably give an update back to the board. If it's something to come to an agenda, it would come in for a future action type item or a discussion at a workshop. That would be a normal protocol.
So Rod, just to make sure I verbalize back what I thought I heard you here, I thought I heard you say, not here, say that the superintendent would consult with the board on the issue that's brought forward during call to public.
No. Superintendent would research the issue that's brought before the board.
Okay, research the issue, okay.
Yep.
And then
they would reach out to the person.
who,
The superintendent would reach out.
who's the person?
Well, whoever spoke.
Correct. I'm just asking for clarity.
Yeah. Whoever spoke.
Yep.
They reach out to them and they maybe do a little more information, like, hey, I heard you say this, is that what you meant?
Yeah.
All of that. And then they hopefully are able to resolve whatever it is.
So this is not a criticism of you, Dr. All. It's a key point of clarification as a former member of the community who was not on a school board. When a community member comes in front of the school board and has a particular issue that they present to the school board, I'm curious in this district if we have a practice of engaging with the community members who come in front of this board in this forum to circle back and follow up as articulated by Rod.
No, we do not follow up on all comments. There are some that are just statements.
Very
There's
few.
other times when they're requests, we follow up on request. When it's a statement, a lot of times people just want to be heard.
Sure.
And they want to make a statement that you hear. That's one that we would not loop back if there was not a question or an inquiry directly to the board.
So in the last 6 months, I won't hold you to this, but generally speaking, how many times do you feel you as a superintendent have followed up with a parent that's come in front of the school board?
Or it could be a director.
Yeah, anyone who's come in as far as
Well, I mean, it could be someone other than the superintendent.
parent specifically.
Well, I mean, it could be someone else other than superintendent reaching out.
I asked the question.
Okay.
And then there's a reason why, and I'll explain. But no, I want to hear the response.
No, absolutely. So in all honesty, in the last 6 months,
Yeah,
the crowds are small. So a lot of my follow-ups are directly after, just like the board oftentimes.
Still very few.
The meeting ends and you walk over and you talk with somebody and say, hey, that was a neat idea. And, we'll take a look at that, or let's get together next week. I like to do it in that informal manner. Sometimes when, like during the pandemic, where we might get, 60 comments on one topic, we wouldn't follow up with 60
I wouldn't
people.
expect you to.
But when it's small, like in the last 6 months, it's been great. It's been a great opportunity. The crowd's been small, and the one-to-one follow-ups is the best. I think is the best business.
So you follow up with those parents then, when it's a particular one-off issue, you are following up with parents in the district?
If there's a specific question and it's appropriate, yeah, I'll do it right afterwards. Oftentimes.
So rough numbers, how many have you personally followed up with?
I'm not 100% sure. Our
Yes?
crowds have not been. I'm not going to guess,
Okay.
but we haven't had a lot of specific questions asked of the board. At our board meetings in the last 6 months.
So again, this is not a criticism of Dr. Outlaw. I came before this board before Dr. Outlaw was a superintendent. And in engaging with members of this community, parents of all walks of life, of all political stripes, a major source of frustration for members of the community coming in front of any school board is the fact that there's very little engagement that happens when you walk out those doors at the end of the meeting.
Well,
And I feel part of it is a little bit by design, because of everyone is terrified of all of the potential pitfalls that you could get into as you start to engage. But I will say, I am sitting here today because I've made a commitment to the members of the community who elected me to bring a higher level of transparency to the community through our engagement, as was mentioned earlier.
here's a thought for you.
And it's hard when we go offline outside of this forum. I get criticized, rightly so, because per Open Public Meeting Act, we are unable to truly converse and have any type of discussion outside of this forum as a complete board.
This is what I'm saying, Andy, and I want you to hear me on this. These are techniques I'm offering for protocols that can help with that engagement. And so what I'm saying and I'm saying this to everybody here, I think you should close the loop. I think, Matt, and I don't know what you do exactly in terms of communication with the board, but if someone stands up here, even the lady that stood up here before, now that was just a comment, probably doesn't really require a lot of follow-up.
Well, hold on. Wait a minute. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to bring it up because it's realistic and it happened here tonight. So who's going to follow up with that lady in regards to John Thompson's conversation?
Well, that's what I was just gonna say, is that in my mind, and Matt, please don't, get mad at me if you don't agree with me. In my mind, superintendent, board president is basically presiding over this meeting. Board president basically says, hey, are you gonna follow up? Matt says yes. I mean, in my mind, I know if there's 60 comments, all right, that's impossible.
We all do, right?
But if it's 4 comments, I mean, I did this work for 24 years. I mean, I followed up with people. And then what I'm saying is that after that follow-up, you close the loop with the board because you tell the board, hey, I've reached out to that person. This is what happened, boom, end of story. And then I'm even saying, going one step further, is at the next board meeting, in the superintendent's report, and please don't kill me if I'm wrong on all this, then you might even say something in your superintendent's report. Hey, those 3 comments we had last week, we've been doing some follow-up, and here's what happened. I mean, yes, of course, some comments that are made are not designed and cannot be done that way. But some comments can be. And so I'm telling you that instead of having the community feel like you never engage, that you actually start this protocol of following up with this, either superintendent or assistant superintendent. Somebody follows up and then reports back to the board, so the board knows what happened, but then maybe even reports back at the next board meeting. Hey, we had 2 comments last time, here's what happened with that. Another district that I've worked with.
So before we go on to the next district.
And I'm gonna complete this sentence. Another district that I've worked with actually posts on the website frequently asked questions. So if people have come to the board meeting with questions, you reach out, you follow up, and then you post those answers. These are questions that have been asked at recent board meetings. I'm just telling you, there are techniques of dealing with engagement if you wanna engage and try to do it. And I know Matt was interested, I'm sure Roger is interested, I know you all feel this, because everyone feels what you feel, Andy, and that's exactly why I wrote that. Because what I dealt with for all of my career was that exact thing. People saying, we come to the board meeting, but nobody ever answers us. They didn't understand that it's hard for a board that's governing the district to answer a simple question without the administration who does the day-to-day work.
Quick, short question.
Yes.
Is there agreement amongst this board that what was just articulated makes sense and we would support that? Sure.
Yes.
Anyone opposed to that?
Publishing, oh, I'd love to see that, the answers for people, comments.
Absolutely.
Let's ask him that.
So can we clarify what it is I'm doing now? Am I posting responses or am I responding?
So I thought
What?
you articulated it well, and I don't want to pretend that just what you reinforced, it made complete sense. And it's simple, and again, when you're serving in an executive capacity, running a district of this size, there's an expectation that we trust your good judgment on what needs
follow-up?
correct. So to the point of there's 60 people coming to a meeting about a variety of subjects, none of us, I guess I can't speak for everyone. For myself, I would never expect someone to try to follow up on 60 individual people. But in an environment like this evening where there's 3 or 4 people that would come to a meeting, those folks, if we as a district engaged with those folks and followed up with them on the issues they bring forth, provided there's warranted follow-up, it would be a huge step forward for everybody in this community.
Well, and I'll maybe take it another step forward on the engagement, the protocol for us as board members. I think we can provide feedback either funneled through the board president or to Dr. Outlaw on things that we hear from call to the public that we think are important for follow-up with an individual issue, if it's not terribly obvious that it needs to be, or things that we should raise as a board and decide if that's a priority, right? Because if we have 10 parents show up and each of them has a pet project they want the district to fund, do we want our administrators to run down all the details on what it would mean to fund all 10 projects? Maybe, but we as a board should decide if we want to spend the resources that way, right? Before the administration runs off
Completely
and does
agree.
it.
And I would want Dr. Outlaw to use his good judgment on what that criteria is. And as we ease into it, we could learn as we go, right?
Right.
So
And build that filter.
The biggest point of this is closing the loop, trying to close the loop, trying to follow up as needed. So Matt, here's my summary. Somebody speaks, somebody follows up of the team. Who's gonna follow up? Maybe do it right after the meeting, just like you were saying. But then you let the board know, this is how I followed up with that. So that they know, and then maybe at the next board meeting, you let people know how you followed up. That was my thing. That's what Andy said. You guys have to work that out. I'm gonna move on. So let's get into the committees. Let's get into the committees for a second. This is something I know you're interested in. So there's 2 structures for committees. Everyone knows, right? Committee of the whole or standing committees. So what are some of the pluses and minuses? I mean, certainly people might say, hey, if you have a committee of the whole, everybody's informed equally, you're informal in your discussion, the board members are operating within the board structure, you're allowing for more in-depth discussion on issues, maybe it takes a little more time, possibly. Now, your typical standing committees, policy, finance, facilities, some people have other ones. I don't see the point in like a personnel committee. I don't think that is appropriate necessarily. Some of the other committees that are out there, just the big ones is I think what you want to think about, but obviously that's the board's decision and superintendent, of course. In a standing committee, if you have less than a quorum and it's for the purpose of advising, you do not need to post that committee meeting. You can have committee meetings without posting them. If you do have to post it, sometimes people do post committee meetings to avoid disputes that arise of whether it's advisory or deliberative. That's the rule. If it's deliberating towards the board decision, then you're supposed to post it. If it's advisory, then you don't have to post it. If you do post committees, if you ever posted committees, there's 3 things that are required. One is the posting, one is public comment at the committee meeting, and the third thing is keeping minutes. Those are the 3 things you have to do, and then you'd be in compliance. Now, I am suggesting that you could do standing committees without posting them because they're advisory. Okay, now, what are some of the danger zones for committees? And we're going to open up to board discussion in a moment here. If you get an individual standing committee, sometimes it starts getting into administrative work. So one of the big things that I work on with boards is like the board, if you have a board committee, it needs to be about board work. So like, for example, if you're vetting policies, and then those policies are advisory coming to the board, great, no problem. But if you're getting into administrative work, like setting the transportation routes, or talking about, oh, we've got 16 routes and we need 17, that stuff is administrative work, it's not board work. So you gotta be careful of that. You can leave out your other members. This is a danger. So you get 3 people that are on the finance committee, they've got all the info, the other 4 people feel left out. Sometimes there's a lack of accountability. Like, who's really in charge of that committee? Is it a board member? Is it an administrator? What's the chain of command? How does it work? How do you report out? That's a question. Sometimes you might have a board member that starts thinking they're in charge of that area. So one of the districts I dealt with not too long ago was a finance committee. And you had the finance person basically directing traffic all around the district on finances, going in and talking about accounts and, no, that's not the board's job. But yet this person felt empowered because they were the chair of the finance committee. And that's a problem. So, of course, if you get off track with individual board members dictating administrative work, that can be a problem. Of course, the committee of the whole keeps the whole board together and able to direct the administration as a whole. So this is what Alicia was talking about, like you have discussions at the board table and you decide these things. Sometimes individual committees feels like committee meetings. Sometimes individual committees lend themselves to get into administrative day-to-day matters. I don't know what other advantages or disadvantages, and so I'm tossing it out to the board because my next topic is something different. So committees, let's go. Roger, what's your pleasure on talking about committees?
Well, I mean, obviously, in this district, for those who've been on the board more than 1 year, we've done it both ways. We've done it in the standing committee structure. Last year, we did a committee of the whole. I thought that overall, the committee of the whole worked well. Part of it was because of the nature of what we were doing at the time. We were completely revamping all of our policies. We were switching from Neola to Troon. So we were going through hundreds of policies. It just, it made the most sense for all of us to work as a committee of the whole. The bond work, we were making decisions and kind of visioning what we were going to be doing with the contingency dollars. And so that had to be decided by the whole board. So, it lended itself well with the committee of the whole. And I thought it worked well. I think we rely more on the administrators then to come forward to do the vetting. So for example, if there's going to be a policy change, a change to one of our existing policies, with the committee of the whole structure, the administration, with Mr. Scaling and Dr. Outlaw, that their team, they would vet whatever changes. They would consult with Troon as our third party provider. They would then bring it to the committee of the whole with the recommendation versus having the committee do basically that same work.
Did you discuss it then when it was brought to the committee of the whole? Was it discussed? Was it explained?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we were adopting the entire book of policies. I mean, we spent 3 meetings. We spent like 12 hours.
Okay.
Because it did require
It was
that.
good work, Chad. You like that? Sure, just messing with
So
you.
I
I'm just
mean-
messing with you, I'm sorry.
I guess from my perspective, I thought the committee of the whole worked well. I thought we were efficient in that regard. But I mean, I'm certainly open to, hearing what others have to say.
Somebody else, John?
Again, I think it was a time and place for it. I've written down what I think as far as I'd like to reinstate committees and under Roger's organization, obviously, but curriculum committee, safety and grounds, personnel, human resources, board liaison to school buildings, contract negotiations committee, school policy oversight, finance, bond, again, we're out of bound pretty much, skilled trades, STEAM, STEM, CTE committee, and then I got several others, but I mean, bathroom safety, staff monitoring, discipline, safety, satisfaction survey, school districts as a whole committee, finances. There's a lot of things I'd like to see. And I think we have the people here to do it. I really do, and do it properly. But we're going to fall under Roger's direction as the president of the board and see how he can hand these out. I think there was some things COVID changed the world.
Right.
It did.
So, John, it sounds like some of those committees are kind of administrative.
Could be,
So-
could be. But like I said, it's up to Roger and we'll talk about it and he'll figure it out.
Other comments?
I just
Yes.
have a question, being newer, so I'd be interested in everyone else that's already been on the board, and maybe Andy, you have an opinion too. Was it more likely that you were proactive in the subcommittee structure rather than reactive in the committee of the whole? It seems to me from the outside that the subcommittee would lend itself to taking on some smaller projects or initiatives versus waiting for things to be brought to the table in a larger decision manner, which seems more reactionary than proactive to me. But again, I'm interested in what your experience was because I've not done either, obviously being new to the board.
So let me give you an example of where I think we failed this past year with a committee of the whole compared to having a bond committee. Why do you think we're paying the construction manager an additional year for his services? Why are we still paying the architect for the things that he didn't put on the drawings? Because I believe the committee of the whole, these issues were brought before the committee of the whole, and it took time to get them scheduled, to get them on, and to get them addressed by the board to move forward with, where during the last bond and the bond committees, we were able to vet a lot of that stuff out and bring it back to the board and say, hey, we recommend we do this, vote on it without having the big, long debate, which continued to let the board or let the bond move smoothly ahead. With this particular bond, again, with the committee of the whole, that's part of the reason why we're paying for an additional year of time right now, is because we couldn't react fast enough, make commitments. We couldn't vet. We had administrators making decisions that they certainly weren't qualified to make, but they were making decisions because it would take time for it to come back to the committee of the whole to get a decision made. So to me, I would agree with Roger from the standpoint of the policies and those kinds of things as a committee of the whole, but from the bond, I don't think it worked at all well.
Well, I mean, I will respectfully disagree with why we're paying for extra time on the construction work.
Oh, tell me, please. I'd like to hear this.
I think we as a board changed our mind on a number of things that made the projects take longer. But for the purpose of the discussion just on committees, I think that the committee of the whole structure provided a greater level of information for all of us and transparency to the public that we didn't have in the individual committees. I agree with Jennifer. With the individual committees, you may have more opportunity for digging into particular issues to then bring back a recommendation to the board to have the administration dive in on a particular topic. It gives you a different structure to have a smaller discussion on that, and that can be valuable. But I think on the whole, I felt far more informed about what was going on from a finance and a bond perspective, because those were not committees that I was always on when we were doing committee of the whole, as opposed to when we had the committee structure. Because I don't think we did a very good job as board members of holding each other accountable for the reporting out and the planning when we were in the committee structure. And we did a better job of that when we all had to sit through the same presentations for the committee of the whole.
Well, couldn't you call any board member on any committee and ask them their opinions and what their thoughts were in regards to what was being made and what was being done at any time?
It was a question of how many opportunities I wanted to have for us to be in violation of Open Meetings Acts, because we can't have.
No, I said you could,
those
no,
chain
no, no, that's not
discussions.
what I asked. I said you could call any board member on any committee at any time that you'd want and ask any question you would want to ask, correct?
But if I called you, that meant that I couldn't call anybody else, right?
No,
Because
that-
I
that
needed to
doesn't
make
mean
sure
that's
that
the
I didn't
case.
have a phone
You-
tree that looked like I talked to 4 people.
No,
No,
No.
that's how that works.
no, it's
I
not,
can't talk to
because
4
if you're
people on
not,
the
if
same
you're not
subject
rendering a
unless we're here.
decision,
But
With-
we're
If
not,
you're just trying to get the information, you can
Right.
talk, like Bill was saying, you can
Exactly.
talk to one person. But the reporting out of committees is always a problem for districts. They have trouble with that because it's hard. But especially if you had too many committees, and I know John was, spitballing a little bit.
Well, yeah, it was, but I want to share though, I thought when they were broken up in committees, that it was very, very resourceful for me because the in-depth study that mainly these ladies were doing on some stuff, and it was the health committee and all the different stuff that they're very knowledgeable about. I was very comfortable in hearing what they brought back from that, we'll call it a high level of knowledge versus just skimming the surface. What happened in the committee of the whole was, and it kind of had to in a way at the juncture it happened, it kind of got a little bit where there wasn't real in depth, but we did learn more, if you didn't know about one thing or the other. That's very
Well,
true.
you could definitely.
So I think the intensity though of having the committee and having
Yeah.
people that are diving into a subject, working hard like this, I envision the STEAM science committee potentially someday, right? That would then bring back, these 3 people that are just running around figuring out what's the greatest wheel to turn.
You could actually, of course, you could do a combo. You could have committee of the whole, but then have a couple of other committees. I'm not saying you want to do that, but
Right.
sometimes what boards do is they'll do the ad hoc. Like, let's say there's something going on.
In science,
The science thing
whatever.
in particular is something that you're interested in. So you might set up an ad hoc for that, not standing. See the difference between that? So, and it has an ending and it has a purpose. But the other thing I would just say between what you guys were saying to Matt is that you can do some of that same stuff that you're talking about with the detail and out committee of the whole. You can have more detail, you can work on things, and that could be a combo between the board, like Alicia said earlier, or maybe it was Andy, about, what stuff do we want to know from Matt? What stuff do we have interest in? And some of that is appropriate to tell Roger or to tell Matt, like, hey, can we get this on the agenda? That's back where I was talking about the board calendar, right? The idea of how do you get board members to engage in the things that they want to engage in. Of course, the administration is putting together the agenda. We're going to talk about the agenda in a minute. The board doesn't know all of the business sometimes that has to go before the board. The administration knows that. But the board has some interest in some things. You got on the board for a reason. You got on the board for a reason. And so sometimes those things can be brought up in a committee of the whole structure to do that. Yes?
I'd like to kind of follow up on what Alicia was saying about the transparency. I think that was the biggest positive thing I felt that we had when we had the committee of the whole, is that we were very transparent in our work.
Yeah.
I did learn about the bond that I did not know was going on, that I was not getting that kind of information when we were doing the report outs from the
Didn't
committees.
you say the committees would be open to the public as well, right?
You could do that. Yes, you can do that.
So how much better transparency is that?
but we can't have more than 3 board members.
Right.
That's true. You cannot do
Right.
that. So the rule on that, let me explain that just for a second. If you have a committee, but you're gonna have a 4th member come, you can't call it a committee anymore. You have to call it a board meeting, you have to post it as a board meeting, do the stuff as board meetings. So it's not allowable to have somebody like you 3 are on the committee and then Bill is sitting over here. Not allowable.
But just to follow up on the comment you made, in terms of the bond, so when the bond committee, prior to last year when we moved to a committee of the whole, what happened was there was discussion with the bond committee members and the professional, the design team, the architect, the engineer, and they would talk about concepts. They would then do drawings, and then when it came back to the board, we as a board would say, well, no, we made a decision as a majority that we didn't want to necessarily do some of those things. So part of what was designed was at that point just useless, and they needed to kind of go back to the beginning. And that's why I'm saying on stuff like that, it was, I thought, much more efficient for that conversation to be part of the whole board, because we're the ones that have to make that decision. I agree that to the extent, going back to the bond, if you break the bond into subsets, if the issue is in the middle of a construction of one aspect of the bond, they encounter an unforeseen circumstance and they need some direction and they need to consult with somebody, that's going to be a more problematic issue to address as a committee of the whole, because then you got to assemble the whole board. And so from that perspective, and maybe, if we end up in a committee of the whole, I agree what we should probably do is come up with some sort of a process where if the contractors, not designing new projects, but in the actual construction project that's ongoing, if there's unforeseen circumstances that might necessitate a change order or some other direction, that we have a mechanism in place to be able to respond, so we're not holding up the construction process. I agree with that. I think that's a fair, concern.
Well, if you do committee of the whole, a lot of times people will do those on the off weeks, like you have your regular meetings, the schedule, and then you have your committee of the whole meetings, the schedule, people do that all the time. So I don't know this is a special night, right? Thank you for attending. But do you do Monday nights? Third Monday or something? Second Monday, and then maybe the fourth Monday is something. That's kind of what people do. But do you want to have further discussion on this, or do you want to, have you heard enough? I know I hear some differences.
I guess I don't know the format of the evening. I was under the impression you were going to present, and then we were going to have is the intent like?
Discussing.
Okay.
This is your discussion time. So I was just asking if you wanted more discussion time.
Okay.
So go ahead.
No, that's what I was looking for, that clarification.
This is your discussion time on committees. If you want more discussion, let me know. Otherwise,
I might have forgot a couple. Give me a second.
okay.
All right,
John.
just for something to think about. These
We're not
are,
really voting on anything.
No, I know that.
John decided
Just for
that
discussion.
You want to hear the comments from the board members.
right,
Maybe just explain
Can
a little further. You were mentioning ad hoc if you did committee of the whole. And so what would that look like in
Mrs. Marks,
reality with something?
if I could, I was
Yeah.
going to finish.
Sure.
Oh,
Oh, I
go
didn't know
ahead.
you were talking. Sorry.
Thank you. I apologize, but I got it's in the head here again.
Heard you pause.
I did. I paused for a momentary as I was flipping my page. On the primary one for me is a finance committee,
Okay.
and then other committees to follow, be it the curriculum and some other ideas. And I'm pretty strong in the idea that we need to do that. And however, we can talk to our president and discuss what would fit in our system the best to help everybody to get it so it becomes a fruitful endeavor, then I would think it'd be great. And I'd love to publish the committee and put it up that it's going to be meeting on a certain date. So if there's any interested or concerned citizens, they're welcome to come. And then again, any questions, like you said, you have to do a call to the public, right? If you have so so you'd have your three, I would just love to follow that structure and see what we can develop from stuff that's already inked. It's not anything that has to be developed new. It's the system is functional. We just have to apply the system and then work within those parameters. So I apologize, but thank you.
Yeah, no, certainly.
Jennifer, you were asking about ad hoc.
Yeah, just to kind of
Yeah, so
further
ad
explain
hoc
that.
committees, generally, they're a length of time. So they're not a standing committee. So
Okay.
you might have a project going on, like I was talking to John about, like the science, the STEM thing that you're working on, and there's a reason that the board wants to have an ad hoc committee work on some stuff. So you work with the board, 3 members and the superintendent, and you're gonna do this committee, or with Liz, with a purpose. So the ad hoc has 2 things. It has a purpose that you're working toward, and it has a length of time.
Okay.
And that's what you're looking for with that structure. So sometimes what I was saying is people, like, for example, if you were going for a bond, somebody might have committee of the whole, they're working on it for a while, and then they ad hoc it. So they say, all right, for the next 4 months, we want this committee to work on this project, and then bring it back to committee whole, that's the kind of idea.
Thank you.
And I would say generally it's less than, ad hocs are usually less than a school year. They would be, 4 months, 5 months, something like that, yeah.
So out of the 10 and a half years that I've sat on this board, we had a committee of the whole early on, and it appeared it didn't work well. We went to the committees, and then we just switched back to committee to the whole. Probably we were in the committees for probably 8 to 9 years. And I thought those worked very well. And again, I couldn't imagine sitting through the amount of policy and going through the policies at the policy committee, even though I did criticize them, there's no question in one portion of it, but that was only one time where I didn't agree with them. But the rest of the time, I had no issues with the policy committee meeting and going through the business of policy, because personally, that's something I didn't want to have to do and to sit through. And I thought it was done very well and certainly took their advisement 95% of the time.
And
All right, any other discussion on committees? Andy?
So I've exchanged, and I referenced at the beginning, you said you didn't know what it was referring to, but I would like to share this publicly so that way there's no concern about the communication that I had with not only Roger, but the broader board. There's, from my vantage point as a new member of the board, there are improvements that we can make to the policy of this district. And, one example that I raised in our correspondence was related to background checks. And so to Bill's point of not having to sit through hours and hours of policy review, perhaps there are other folks on the board who have an interest in policy. And as I shared with you in the opening remarks, to me, policy, especially for a public school, is critical. And safety and background checks and access to district buildings is very, very important and very critical. So I would be in favor of and would support a subcommittee structure that would allow all of us to align around the things that we have interest in, the initiatives or the issues that we have interest in, and then bring recommendations, actionable suggestions to the board. And then to the earlier commentary, if there are folks that want to dive into any particular subcommittee, content to the subcommittee, I think it was suggested that we would try to take the path of making the subcommittee meetings an open meeting for the public to provide ultimate transparency and encourage participation from the community for those that have an interest in being part of the dialogue.
So, and one thing on that I would just say that if you have a certain policy that you don't feel is working or is not adequate, you can let the superintendent know. I mean, that kind of stuff is interest of everybody, and that can be checked out. I mean, I'm not saying that what you said.
So how do we change it?
Well, yeah, I mean.
To play it for, so I let them know hypothetically what happened, how does the policy change? So going forward, it's
So then eventually we come to the board.
correct.
Then we come to the board. I mean, it would be like if you had an idea or something was missing, I mean, they would vet it out. And then if it was true, either he would explain to you, no, this is why it's covered, and here's what the law says, and this is what we need. And try to make sure you're on board with that. But if you're not, then eventually, if there was something, then we come to the full board.
Even if everybody is on board with it, policy changes have to come to the.
Oh, yeah, and it would
Correct.
eventually come to
Thank
the
you.
board for sure. But I'm just saying in terms of, as a board member, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, Matt wants to hear if there is something that you feel is amiss, then he would want to hear that. I mean, then we would start working on that right away. It's not like it has to wait for the board to say, hey, am I right?
You hear from Andrew P. Storm if he thinks something is amiss, Dr. Outlaw?
I'll never. We haven't heard any of that stuff.
He is saying yes, so, okay. Roger, anything else on this? You want me to move forward, because we got some other things we want to talk about.
No, I think we've shared, each of our respective thoughts. We'll have to ultimately come up with a decision, but I think in the sake of time, we probably should.
Can I ask a quick question?
That's good,
Oh,
Dr. Outlaw.
I was just going to ask, so when is the board going to make that decision?
I was wondering, why can't we make that decision tonight? What's
Yeah.
holding us back from making that decision? Is it, it's not
Make a
contentious, is
motion
it?
if somebody makes a motion.
I mean, that's not something we have to vote on.
No, this is something that is generally up to the board president. You know, obviously, the board president's been elected by the board. They are kind of in charge of setting up these kinds of protocols. But he's getting your input, but I don't know if he's ready to ask you for a final call on it or not. I'm not sure. I'm not gonna answer for you.
Well, I mean, it seems like we're kind of split, right? I mean, I guess tell me what
It's a committee of the whole.
committee of the whole? John, you have some.
Individual
standing
committees.
Individual.
I think I'd prefer individual committees if we knew what they were. I don't think I want a laundry list of 25 different committees.
Okay.
Sorry. That was overwhelming to me.
Right in the
I'll
kneecap.
support that, Jennifer.
But that's where I'm at.
I like the idea of continuing with the committee of the whole, but maybe adding in some ad hoc committees to deal with specific issues for short periods of time.
And I favor this subcommittee structure.
Okay. So Roger, you've got your input. You can let people know, talk to Matt about structuring. I think Jennifer has a good point about what would the committees be. This is something you should talk about, get input from the board.
Yeah.
Again, I was under the impression that the intent of this evening was to make these decisions. What's holding us back as a board from making these
I
decisions?
think that first of all, I would say, I think it makes sense to still, in some fashion, maintain a committee of the whole. I'm not saying that that's to the exclusion of having other committees. So I think what I would like to do is I'll get with Matt. What's today, Tuesday? By Thursday, I'll send out an email as to what I think would be the best structure. I think it will be in some fashion envisioning that we may have a need to have a committee of the whole, but whether you call it ad hoc or standard
Still do
committees
some
to
individual.
deal with the individuals, I think that probably makes sense. I mean, I'm cognizant of the fact that the majority of the board wants to go with.
I
standard
strongly
standard
suggest,
committee.
like a finance committee has the parameters around it that are brick and mortar as they've been done historically here. And it's $100 million budget, okay? And that policy is not just here, it's in other school districts, and it's very formidable. It's not like we have to re-engineer anything. We put it in place, this is what we do, and
How about something like this, just as your friendly neighborhood consultant here? You still got committee of the whole dates.
do we have to pay you overtime?
No.
Okay.
I'm really.
We were shooting for a 9 o'clock hard stop was our plan.
Don't even listen
but
to that. So
for
I
this
still got
part-
my schedule.
for this
Well,
part.
I was told the whole intent of the workshop tonight was the committee of the whole, that was the intent.
I have a suggestion. Keep your committee of the whole dates, kind of like Roger just said, but have a couple of standing committees or maybe 3, and then if you need a couple ad hoc, you can do that. But do a combo thing, but get with Matt on, how would the structure work, so you just have a little bit, but obviously, I think you've heard from the board, I think a combo.
I think we just
Lon, if we-
outvoted you just now.
Yeah, I was going to say, if, I
just
could
do
have swore I
committees.
heard 4 people that said they wanted committees. Now, if that needs to go to a vote, to a resolution, or in order to make that
I'm
happen,
okay with the
then,
committee of the whole to blend, but
well,
That's what I think, that's what I'm saying.
I'm fine with that, but I
I'm
think
not
that we do have
opposed
some.
to the committee of the whole either, but I'd like to see the
and
subcommittees.
these
Agreed,
policies.
and again,
I think that's what Roger's going to do, for
I-
sure. Yeah.
Just said that.
Okay, but so what's the point is, we know what the committees are. We've had committees for the last 8 years.
Longer than that.
I
Are there,
decades.
are there any new ones added?
I don't think we know what the committees are, because Mr. Conley has a list of things.
Like,
that we want.
Star can certainly,
Committees.
Star can certainly tell you what.
Fair-
the
fair
heck
point.
is.
So again-
So are we
He's right,
doing
though.
3? Are we doing 20?
Make a recommendation that we return to the committees that existed prior to moving to a committee of the whole and start there and then modify later if
Let's
you
look at
need
the
to.
list.
I think there are 3 committees. You have a bond, you have a finance, at a business time, and then policy.
And we
Those were
can
the
add to
3.
that.
so Dr. Outlaw,
Those were the 3 committees. Yep.
express concern, point of interest for me as a new board member is security.
Right.
And I'm just wondering in 2023, if it makes sense to have a subcommittee that is focused exclusively on security.
There is
And-
one list.
There is a administrative level security committee.
Yep.
It's not directed by the board, so we don't have a board level committee that we have in the past.
It has all the
for participation.
police and people from the state and all these people that are on that committee, but So maybe we get a board representative to
You know,
join
I'll
us on
just-
that?
In the spirit of
Would that
dialogue.
work?
Yeah.
So if I may, because again, this was like supposed to be kind of the meat and potatoes of this, right? And I'll use an example that's affected me. I am a new member of the school board. I went and met with Star before my formal term began to do all the paperwork and get all the onboarding, pictures, the bio and everything. And we held, I think, maybe 2 formal meetings, public meetings. I could be wrong. Maybe it was between the first and the second. I think it was 2 full meetings. And then I received an email requesting me to fill out a background check, which I'm happy to provide and strongly encourage.
So why wasn't it earlier?
Bingo. So I said, well, what's the policy? Policy was sent to me. I looked at the policy and the policy says there's the word may, M-A-Y. And if anyone knows anything about policy, especially as it relates to something as safety critical as background checks, when we're talking about a public school and children, may in the policy of getting a background check essentially suggests that there's no real meaningful, impactful policy around getting a background check if it's optional. And so that was a concern. But of greater concern to me was if there is policy that suggests a new school board member should get a background check, why wasn't my background check complete before I received badge access to this district? And if there was not policy suggesting I needed to get a background check, why did I receive a request to complete a background check if it's not necessary, if it's not part of the district policy?
So that kind of stuff can be figured out with the administration. And you said there's 3 committees that have been in the past.
Yes.
Bond, finance, policy are your 3 primary committees.
And then this committee that Andy was just talking about, the security, you have an administrative committee. Is it possibly a board member could attend that?
Sure. Absolutely.
And so what we did in the past, because security is one of the statutory exceptions to the Open Meetings Act, what we would do is that we would get a report on the security protocols in a closed session. Because for obvious reasons that, we don't want to have that information shared publicly. So that's how we've done it in the past. We didn't have a standing security of a board, that would have an open meeting, obviously,
And I think just in the context of this dialogue tonight, there's Michigan State Police, Livingston County Sheriff's security protocol as it relates to the district. And then there's the basic blocking and tackling, the district policy that establishes how members of the community, how employees of this district come into and out of district property, buildings. And to me, as a layman, reading the existing policy, it seems to me there's very real policy gaps that exist. And in my short tenure on this board, there have been examples where we have seen individuals who have come into district buildings that should not have been in district buildings. That is, again, through the prism of someone who's new to this board, the policy should have clearly established how those folks are ultimately provided access. And if the policy is being followed, then there would have been, the access that was granted would have been handled in a different manner if in fact the policy was being followed.
So if I could.
So the moral of the story, there's concerns I have that.
Alicia?
I want to play problem solver here, so I apologize. If I'm stepping, but I think if we're having committees again, that is work that the policy committee can start working on with the administration, like dealing with the actual documentation. And you can raise security, any board member could raise concerns about security policy documents, and the policy committee could work on it and bring it back to the board for any needed changes. And then if we combine that with the closed session discussions about the concerns that you've raised as a board member and as a parent in the district, we could have a discussion about the blocking and tackling and the operational end of how we get the work done in that closed session. And that would probably still inform the work that the policy committee could do. But I think those 2 things might might give good forums for the issues that you're raising right now. What do you think? I mean, does that work?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so too.
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing, I mean, honestly, on something like security, Andy, you should feel free to talk to Matt immediately. I mean, these kind
I
of
do.
things, okay. And so, but yes, policy committee can handle that type of stuff for sure. So I'm gonna ask the board, and I'm gonna start with Roger, do we feel like we have direction here on the committees, what you're gonna do, Jennifer?
I'm sorry, can I just ask one more question? This is about the committees, like the three. So prior to the bond, because the bond hasn't been around the entire existence, there was a committee structure. Does anyone know what those committees were? Because it was facilities. Has this district ever had a curriculum committee for the?
We had an ad hoc curriculum committee when COVID, when we were deciding how we were going to return to school. in
Managing
2020.
the return,
Right.
but not a standing committee?
Well, we had like a school improvement group where we would have board members who would attend that, but not a committee. So
Right.
not
It wasn't a board committee.
Okay.
Right, exactly.
But I believe when Dr. Suri was here and she was in charge of curriculum, there was a curriculum committee that a board member, in fact, I believe Beth Minor was the one that sat on it. So yes, there was a curriculum.
It was the school improvement team set up
But it was
board.
from the school, not the board.
So
Yeah,
the difference
okay.
between the committees, board committees usually have 3 board members, they're really doing board work. It's supposed to come to the board. A school committee is doing school work where a board member might sit.
Like join, right.
Yeah, and in that, I'm going to suggest as well as finance that there should be a committee on curriculum in a form of professional alignment, same way. So if it's a finance curriculum, and like Roger said, we go down and we go with the original 3 that we had, but there's some more, and see if the board members can buy in, because you have to have volunteers. These committees, you have board meetings plus committee meetings. It's a big deal.
Well, and-
It's a big deal.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean,
It's hard to
I would
do.
ask that everyone send me by whenever,
Yeah.
tomorrow or Thursday, what your, I mean,
What the
obviously-
thoughts are,
Right,
right?
well, what committees you want to be on. I mean, obviously, everyone can't be on every committee. So, tell me what your priority is, on those committees so that I can
You're gonna
plug
send
in.
out the committees to the board, so what are you thinking about, finance, policy,
bond facility.
bond /
Facilities, what we
facility?
call it, I'd do the same, yeah, which is what we need to have.
Jennifer, I would support curriculum committee,
I'd second
subcommittee,
that.
if that is something
I'd
that you're
second
interested
that.
in.
For curriculum.
Curriculum committee?
Yep.
People, you wanna have a curriculum committee?
So in terms of would the curriculum committee then be part of the meeting with that's already, that has the
No,
district
not
committee?
necessarily.
No.
So it's a good question, Roger.
No, I'm trying to figure out the overlap.
It would be the
So-
correct.
I think the
So one of the conversations I've had one-on-one with Dr. Outlaw that is consistent with the strategic plan for the district is the thought of individualized career paths, right? And individualized learning paths for students that are in this district. And when we talk about the curriculum that we have in the district, it would be great to be able to work with colleagues in an open forum, invite participation from the community, and look for ways to improve the curriculum of the district, programming in the district. That's something that I think would be a huge step forward for all of us, for everybody.
So the curriculum committee of the board members should meet with Liz. They should set the vision. They should figure out what they want to do moving forward. Then they should go back to this other committee and listen to their input as well. And then someone come back to us through that committee to explain what the thoughts are, like any other committee would do, right?
Yeah, actually, Bill, that's exactly right. You really need to talk to Liz and Matt about what would this committee do. And then, once you've done that, you probably have some work to do to hear what's going on in the district curriculum wise.
It just so happens I have this one kind of written out.
Oh, you do?
So yes, I do. Curriculum committee, plan, evaluate, adopt, deny new curriculum or additions or deletions to current curriculum, crafts projects, such as including critical, we'll bring that up right now. But I don't believe in promotion of certain types of things, and the committee would discuss that. So, potentially some teacher surveys, some different things that would come back. But I think it's imperative as we go forward in the changing world that we're in, that the boards bring forward their knowledge of what's going on within the industries that they partake in. This whole thing that, we're going to stay in a boilerplate that we used 10 and 20 years ago to compete in the world coming is obsolete. It's moving and changing as quick as we made it. It's changed the next day. And computer technology is a good indication of how that works. You figured it out. Next thing you know, there's a next step. That's what's happened. Now, are we going to keep pace with that in education? It's hard to keep pace with it, but I think this could be a great way to work with everybody collaboratively and make it happen, because it has to happen and to be successful at the end of the day. Otherwise, it's going to continue the ratings that we see statewide. Our school, fortunately, is high on the ratings that are statewide, but where do you set the bar at? What are you measuring against to set your ratings so high?
All right, let's get back to the.
Can I say something as someone who's studied curriculum my entire career? I think it's really important that we're not the ones making the decision as to what the curriculum is. We're relying on the experts who are the teachers and Liz and her committees that she sets
But
forward.
bringing ideas, though.
Our goal, as Bill said, is to set the vision. We're looking at a top level governance policy level. We're not coming up with the curriculum and deciding on the curriculum at that level. We're coming up with the vision of what the curriculum is.
So I guess I appreciate you speaking up and sharing that, Dr. Krebs. As someone who hasn't studied curriculum, I think, and I've shared this with many of you, including you and I have discussed this. It feels a lot like today in public education that the curriculum we have, and not just unique to Brighton, just United States public education in general, is very antiquated. Just the structure of it, the way that we as a nation think about curriculum in a public school hasn't really truly changed since I was in school 30 years ago. Many of you have heard this. Well, I'll give you an example. Kids today, my own children who are in public schools, sit in a year of biology. They sit in a year of chemistry. Why? If my child has no interest in becoming a chemist, I think that a child should get exposure to chemistry, but why do they have to waste a full year of their life every day they come to school sitting in chemistry class if they have no interest in the subject matter, they have no desire to be a chemist? Why couldn't they take a 6-week class in chemistry and for the balance of the year go and do game programming where they can ultimately start their own little business, building code for the next cool game? And
I think as long as we're meeting the state standards, the graduation requirements, they could take a survey in science class. I think that would be a great opportunity. But we also need to meet the standards that are set by our state. We need to meet the high school requirements, the graduation requirements set by our state. So those are the things we need to be paying attention to in addition to that.
Oh, completely agree with you. And I think the standards that we have at the state level, we ought to challenge those standards because the standards haven't changed, and that's why the curriculum is so antiquated.
They have.
So let me.
So, not to, and it's a great academic discussion, but we got to try to stay on, with what's with the rest of our agenda.
So the last comment.
Which again prevents us from actually being able to have any true meaningful discussion.
No, I think that
I
that's.
thought her point is, excellent point.
Right, and that would be, the topic that, she's obviously an expert in that. You've got some great ideas. I think we probably all have great ideas in the proper, obviously, whether it's.
Curriculum, so if you're gonna get a curriculum committee, my point would be, you need to involve the curriculum, I agree with what Angela said, the curriculum experts.
I think that's also the difference between the work of a board level committee and the work of Ms. Mosier's or Dr. Mosier's existing teams. There's what is our vision? What are we striving
Yes.
for? That's the board level. And then
I agree with you.
how do
Lisa.
we do that? How do we meet our state standards? What evidence-based ideas do we have to reach our goals? That is the expertise of our administration. So
Educate the community, right?
I think you guys did a great job of demonstrating the difference between those two.
It's a great point.
You have the direction?
Yeah, I just need emails from everyone, say by
What are you
Thursday.
interested in?
Yeah,
Okay.
of the committees you want to serve on.
And that's 4 committees then, with the curriculum being the
Yes.
4th. Okay.
All right,
Could you have Star send those out and us reply to them, right?
That would be, I think, probably.
Exactly.
Can we do that tomorrow?
Scott's
Okay.
gonna send out the 4 committees, and then board members are gonna ask or say, this is the ones I'm interested in. All right, I want to go on to another little topic here that has been asked about, and that is the board meeting agenda.
I promise, short and sweet, but this is related to committees, and it came up in a exchange where it
Please,
needs to be communicated this
you
way.
have the floor.
So if, with Roger's support and the board's support, we implement a subcommittee structure, we need to agree on the norms of how that subcommittee will ultimately meet. And I'm wondering, is it tonight, or is it in another forum environment where we agree on what's the protocol to bring that subcommittee together? So there's alignment amongst this board that we're treating each other fairly, and there's no gamesmanship that's happening.
I think the point, I mean, you've had committees before, so if those worked okay before, I would follow those same kinds of norms, but they need to be communicated. So that would be in your first committee meeting to talk about norms and how you're gonna approach that. So like, a couple of things on your norms would be how often are you meeting, how long are the meetings, how are topics brought up, who's bringing the agenda, I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about. So you have to do that in each committee as you set up the committees.
And it would be different. So finance, they've got some more.
Yeah, it's different.
Right, well, they've got important,
Yeah.
cycles within the budget versus
Always had
buying
finance committees,
facilities.
always.
They're gonna have a different, cycle.
Could I make a recommendation?
As far as scheduling the meetings, Roger, I just want to make sure, again, in a forum like this where we're all together, if there's 3 assigned to the curriculum subcommittee, that subcommittee shouldn't meet at a time, if the 3 board members who are committing to be part of that subcommittee, the time that we ultimately socialize amongst the 3, we need to agree at the time. How do I say, what I'm trying to say is, all 3 need to
Available.
confirm that they're available.
I agree.
Where I can't set up a meeting with Alicia because, and
Matt had a
not
comment.
allow Jennifer to participate.
Guys, Matt had a comment. Matt?
I was just going to recommend that perhaps we do this organizational stuff, get the committee set, and then maybe on Monday's meeting, you do a follow-up and maybe talk about norms, and maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe just some of the parameters around it, but maybe get organized this week, and then we have a meeting. Maybe we talk about that at Monday's meeting, perhaps?
I agree that members should be able to attend.
Yes.
Alicia?
Instead of coming to the next Monday meeting thinking we will set the schedule for the committees, at least at the next Monday meeting, we can confirm who the chair of each committee is and who the members of the committee are. And it would be the chair's responsibility to then coordinate with the other members, board members, in order to.
See, we don't-
set-
Per Robert's rules too.
Per-
You don't- The chair's determined. by
Yeah, the
committee.
chair's determined by the committee.
Committee.
I just need somebody to be responsible for setting the first meeting, because I don't think I want to
Usually it would
spend
be
Monday with all of us with our calendars out, setting the first meeting for every committee.
that's amongst the 3.
That's my.
To set their,
That's all I'm.
when they
doing.
want to meet and when they can
Set
meet.
the first meeting, the administration can help set the first meeting, and then from there, chairperson can be determined, and then you can determine your structure and your norms. So.
And it may be beneficial to review the truant policies on the committee selections are different than they were under Neola. So that might be something to take a glance at as well. So.
All right, I'm moving off committees.
Except if people want more than 4 committees, they can submit to Roger what the other committees might be, and he can think about it.
Roger, you
Okay.
got
Yeah,
it.
and obviously,
And
Yeah.
certainly
not to beat a
involve
dead
the-
horse, but
Yeah.
there might be ad hoc.
Sure,
committee that
all the
come
ad
up
hoc
that
idea is
the
good.
Administration says we really should have an ad hoc
And I
committee to
still
study
think you should
this.
have a committee of the whole in some fashion, make it shorter, whatever. All right, I want to talk about agenda. How does your agenda get set? How does the agenda get set? So I don't know if the new board members know, but generally the administration is setting the agenda. And you kind of go off of, past agendas and past, what'd you do last February, right? What'd you do, what needs to be done from January? There's a process for that. These 2 are doing that. Am I right?
Yeah, in collaboration, but yeah.
In collaboration.
I have
So
one thing to
what's-
say. That's not what I was told. I was told Roger sets the agenda.
Well, Roger approves the agenda.
And so what we do is, so there's a lot of the business items, I mean, that comes to administration. They know what
Right.
we have to have for future action, for action. I talk to Matt, and then what we do is we have an executive committee meeting, which we had this morning with Ms. Trombley and Ms. Marks, and we talk about it. I'm not the king. I certainly welcome input.
You are the president.
I welcome input from others, and so we collaborate and we talk about how we should, finalize the agenda. That's how we do it.
So up until this past year, it's always been the idea, or I say idea, at least that I can remember, that if two board members wanted something on the agenda, it went on the agenda.
Is there a policy in regard to that?
No.
You know?
So there was with Neola, and we do not currently have that. That'll be something maybe that the policy committee might want to look at. I
So-
do not believe that exists in Trim.
On that specific note, I'd like the board to adopt a policy so that two board members can put something on the agenda. Because during the time when we had the policy, we couldn't get things put on even when two board members wanted it on. So we need to address that directly. Yes, sir.
How do we go about doing that?
Just
Can we vote on
decide that we want to do it and tell Roger.
Well, you have to, you're gonna have to adopt the policies that comes from Matt, so Matt and Roger, if that's something that you wanna talk about and bring forth, if it's not in the current policies, then that's.
Well, and just to clarify, we didn't have a policy that if two board members wanted something on a regular agenda, the policy was that there could be two members that could request an emergency meeting. And that was the policy, which then got changed to three board members.
And that is an
That's why I said
existing
no.
policy in
It
Trim.
is now.
Because two board members
That is
couldn't
existing.
unless it was one of those types of things.
Right. And it was for a special meeting, emergency meeting, whatever you want to call it. That was, so, but we didn't have a policy with respect to.
It was just thought we had one over the years.
Regular agenda.
So-
It had been honored.
So Andy,
So to change the policy to enable two board members to add an item to the agenda, what needs to happen?
Someone needs to write it, and then it has to come through review, and the board has to vote on it.
It is,
so, yes,
Who-
and so basically, you'd ask your administrator to develop that policy, make sure you get the right wording, the right number, whatever, and you bring it forward through your policy committee or through the committee of the whole to the board. But a couple of things. When you're adding stuff to the agenda, you need everyone to be prepared for whatever you're adding, and so this is why I had this idea I gave you earlier of future agendas. It's not so much adding it to this agenda. So like, for example, you have a board meeting, you had an agenda tonight, right? You had a few things on it. And so if people add stuff to the agenda, even tonight when you're all together, none of the other people know what you're going to talk about. It's a surprise. So what we're trying to say to people is let people be prepared for what the discussion is going to be about.
it's not practical. In the construct of the board, it's illegal for all of us to meet and discuss anything of substance together outside of this forum.
No,
And
I'm
so
saying
it-
that you give notice of what the thing is going to be on the agenda. Hey, in April, we're going to have this discussion item, that type of thing. So you're not just adding stuff to the agenda off the cuff. That's what I'm saying.
But I don't think that's what John is talking about, is adding it tonight. I mean, you might be,
Add
but
it in the
But
thing.
if
Add
we
it in
say,
on
if we all
Wednesday.
say tonight,
discussion.
at the next meeting, we'd like to cover X,
Correct.
Y,
Just
Z.
that we're open for,
That's fine, I get that, so that, I was clarifying between those two things,
Yeah.
but yeah, so if on Thursday, let's say you got a board meeting on Monday, you're getting the agenda together the previous Monday, you say to Matt, we'd like to see this on the agenda. I mean, sometimes there's a reason why it's not on the agenda, you say to Roger, right, so you guys, but yes, two board members, I think that's a general thing, but if it's not a policy, you should make it a policy. Roger?
But don't forget too, when it's on the agenda, it doesn't mean it's for action.
Well, that's
Right.
the issue, right? It's, because that was what was happening.
It's for
is-
discussion.
Right.
I know,
But
but still, Bill, sometimes people feel uncomfortable if it's sprung on them, and they don't know what the topic is. So I'm saying, like, if you do it in advance and they see it, so you guys get your agenda on what, Thursdays for Friday, for Thursday for Monday? So then you can see the agenda, then it's not a surprise. That's what I'm saying. And you need to be able to, the board should know what's gonna be on the agenda.
Yeah, I guess. What I was referring to is what you just mentioned. Like, that's the desire, that is my own personal intent, is that with support from another member of the board,
Put
we can-
something on, and then everybody can see
Correct.
it, and then you talk about it.
correct, for
Yes,
everybody.
That should be able to be done, and then it's not a surprise. That's fine. You guys can work on that? Yeah. Now, I just have on here,
So,
the superintendent is the professional advisor to the board. So you're asking the superintendent to make recommendations and vet out things that you're interested in. You know, so you're not, again, the board is not doing things in isolation without advice. Yes, question.
just wanted to formally request that the policy is written and presented to the board to act upon at the next board meeting. Is that possible?
So the rules on policies, if the rules on policies, you have to have a first reading and then a second.
Perfect.
Are we
So-
talking about regarding background check?
No,
Two-
no, 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 no.
Two
Oh, on this
board
part, the
members
fifth-
being able to add something to the agenda. We all nodded our head, but
Got it. You said
it's a formal
I think
request.
Mr. Scanlon might have said 2502 is the current policy, so we can take a look at that and get back with you, so.
Does it say the two board member thing or it doesn't say? All right, so it needs to be revised. So how it happens is you work on it, comes to the board for first reading, and then it can be approved in the next meeting. All right?
So it will be worked on.
Yeah, I just wrote it down. Yeah.
He's got it down. He just wrote it down.
Thank you.
All right, so what about amending motions? I know we're each one of these little things. It's fine, you guys, and you're doing great. I appreciate your listening to me at all, in any respect. Can you amend motions? Should you amend motions? Of course you can amend motions. You know some of the rules about it, right? There has to be a motion made first in support. Then there's discussion. Roger, you're doing this, right? Hey, can I have a motion? Can I have support? Now, is there any discussion? So you have some discussion, and then someone says, you know what, after that discussion, I'd like to amend that motion. So it is fine to do that. It is also, it can be surprising to people, but if there's good discussion, it should be fine. Have you ever had this happen? Do you do this? Have you done this?
To amend motions?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Alicia does it all the time.
I mean, literally.
It's every meeting, no.
Yeah, just about.
Alicia.
Just about every meeting, we have a motion to amend.
She's it. She's the motion amender.
Okay, so I would say that I would like to see the motions thought out and written out so people can see them, right? Are we doing that? Yes. And then if there needs to be an amendment, you're voting on the amendment separate from the main motion. You know how to do all this, all right? Now, you just want to be sure that people understand what you're amending, that's all I'm saying here. And so I do think, I said this earlier, I'm gonna say, I don't think you should be changing the agenda on people right at the meeting. I think people should know what you're talking about, including your public. I think people should know what you're talking about. In other words, oh, we decided to add the track on, right? No, don't add the track on the agenda. Are you with me? You want to put stuff on the agenda that people know you're talking about. So that's my thing on that. Now, what about board member comments? You guys have a spot on the agenda that you make comments?
Not anymore.
You cut it, all right? Do I need to say anything about this? If you're gonna have it on there, I say it should be just kind of innocuous, positive, events coming up, stuff like that, not about new stuff that's surprising.
Right, well, and I agree, and I think what, I fully support, the end of the meeting, I mean, again, it goes back to norms and, connection with the community. I mean, I think
Yes.
we need to have a space, and I think if it's perfectly at the end of the meeting, where the board can recognize accomplishments of groups in the district, can talk about upcoming events, can, talk about just general goodwill of the positive things that are going on in the district. The problem is that became sort of a for future action version 2, and that wasn't of things that weren't even on the agenda, which then led into some debate, and it just, it just fell apart. So what I would suggest is that we have, and when you say the board calendar, we've never done that, Rod. So the details of that, but as far as like a board report or a board, comment,
It
or
worked
whatever
pretty
you want
good.
to call it.
It worked
I
fine.
fully support that. I would hope that,
If people
We
do
should
it right, it can be fine.
Yeah.
If people decide they're gonna do their own thing, then it can fall apart.
I
But-
think that's a great goal for the committee of the whole meetings, if we keep those on the calendar, is to talk through the things that we want to have at our meetings for the next month. So the administration has time to prepare, and so do the rest of us.
I disagree with that because I think every board member up here attends different events around the community. They attend different sporting events, they attend choir, they attend plays. And I think it's a good spot to be able to recognize the board member that went to something and came back and reported how well it was and how good the kids did, and that it was whatever, refreshing or whatever to see it happening and those kinds of things, because all of us can't be everywhere at once in order to be able to see all this stuff.
Well, that's the same thing.
So-
What you guys are saying.
I was building off of what Mrs. March
Yeah,
said
you guys
about
were agreeing. I
scheduling
would say
issues,
you were
not
agreeing.
about the.
I thought you were talking about that at committee of the whole.
No.
I'm sorry.
But board reports should be on
I'll
the
add
agenda.
board reports.
Board reports should be on.
Okay.
Okay, good. All right, so, all right.
I'd put them at the
so
beginning.
Let me talk
Quick
about a
ones.
couple of things here, and then I want to get to one other big topic.
I'm real short,
You guys
though.
with me for a little bit?
Yep.
You with me for a little bit? Is this okay? So,
Losing you, Rod.
Mhm.
don't lose me. So posting an agenda, you got that down. The one thing about social gatherings, of course, that's fine to do social gatherings, but you can't do board business, right? You can't have a board meeting at a party. Do not do that. But what about email and texting? Have you heard the thing where you should not be replying to all? You should not reply to all. So when you do your, like, I want to be on these committees, you just send it to Roger, or you send it to Matt, or however you've got, or Star. You're not sending it to the whole board, because it lends itself to the discussion of the whole board outside of a board meeting. So you do not want to be replying to all, you don't want to be routinely sending board members, or sending emails to the whole board. Now, texting is the same thing. Obviously, people have group texts. Discussions are the same thing. You kind of know that. Questions prior to meetings, that's just on there for, talk to Matt. Ask him a question. Ask him what this means. That helps him be better in his reports, in his way that he presents background. You guys know about closed sessions. You don't do executive sessions, you do closed sessions. Executive is for private industry. Closed sessions is what we do in the Open Meetings Act. That's what's in the law. Of course, we talked about public comment. I already covered that. Now, let me ask you a little bit about parliamentary rules. You follow some sort of system, right? You're doing this, you've been doing it for a while. Do you guys ever abstain? Is anybody related to somebody who has to abstain?
there was occasions, yeah.
We abstain when
So
we
the only
vote.
time you really abstain should be when you have a legal conflict of interest. You should not be abstaining on things that you don't have a conflict of interest. So for example, the minutes. Sometimes people abstain on the minutes because, well, I wasn't at the meeting, so I don't know if they did. No, you're not, you should not be doing that. You should be voting on the minutes because
Interesting.
those are the minutes.
Interesting.
And even if you weren't there, you still have to vote on the minutes.
Well, in Washington, they vote present.
Yeah, we don't have that here. In our law, we are yes, no, or abstain, but abstaining is only if you have a legal conflict of interest. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So you should not be abstaining. The chairperson, Roger, you can make motions. If you want to, you could say, I move that we approve the agenda. Just like you did tonight, you asked for a motion, you can make that motion. It's not illegal. And of course, he's voting every time. Even if you don't hear him say aye, it's accepted that if he says all in favor, say aye. He is saying aye unless he says nay. So that's how it works with a chairperson. So this is how she does. Now, in her minutes, she always has to put all of the way people voted. And obviously you do that, right? You've been doing that. Now, what about closing debate? I can see you guys like to debate a little bit. I'm going to just say, has anybody ever made a motion to call a question?
Yes, but they haven't got the proper votes to do it.
Okay, so you need 5 votes to call the question, not 4. That's one of the only motions that requires 2/3 of the majority. There's a few, but that's one of them. And of course, that happened to me when I was a young superintendent. Proxy voting, we don't do secret ballots. So sometimes people run into secret ballots when, like, you're appointing a board member, or you've got something going on, you don't want people to be offended, and so you'll have everyone pass it in. Do not do that. Don't ever have everyone pass it in, always just ask them to say verbally what they're thinking. Now, what if there is no quorum? What if you have 3 people show up here? What's the story? The story is that you can't even call to order. You don't have 4 votes, you don't have a quorum, so you can't even call to order. So we actually had that when I was here one time. I don't know, Roger, if you remember this. I was doing a training, right?
Yeah, but we did it.
You can still do the meeting.
Right, we just couldn't vote on
You
it.
just can't call to order. So we still did the meeting, but there's no minutes, there's no call to order, there was really no meeting. I mean, that's the fact of it. There's no quorum, there's no meeting. Now.
We still had to
what
pay
if
you, though.
What?
We still paid you, even though you didn't have as many board members.
It was,
Go ahead, Rod, sorry.
It was, yes.
Big cash.
Of course you did. What about 4 votes? You always need 4 votes to pass something. So if you have 5 people here, and you have something 3-2, that is not passing. You have to have 4-1. You have to have 4 votes anytime. Is there any exception? Yes. There's a couple of exceptions. One would be is if you had 2 board members that were vacated. They had vacated their seats. So now you only have a 5-member board. Then you can pass something 3-2, like appointing a new board member. Or if you had 4 people that were conflicted on voting on something, such as a contract, so 4 of you guys were related to a contract member, family member, then you can pass something 3-2. But if you have 4 members present, it always has to be 4 votes unless their seats are vacant. So do not fall into that trap. Does everybody understand that? Okay, now.
Hold on, one thing
Yes,
on Robert's Rules of Order,
yes.
and correct me if I'm wrong, or please advise. During a motion, when the motion is up for debate, and we're getting ready to vote on it, and each one of the board members is stating their opinion on the motion, or discussing the motion, can the officers of the board state how they're going to vote during that discussion?
Yes, you're not limited on your debate, on your words or your discussion. You can say, I'm gonna support this because, or whatever, I'm not gonna support this because, you can talk like that during that discussion period.
Okay, so that's not influencing any of the other board members to vote any way or the other?
No,
Okay,
it doesn't, that's not against the rules.
okay.
Any other questions on some of these rules? So how do I know all this stuff, right? Of course, I've been doing it a while, but I also teach school law for Oakland University, so I've gotten a lot of experience in dealing with some of this stuff. So let me summarize a couple of things here, and then I want to have one more thought. We're almost done. Are you guys still with me?
Yep.
So this is kind of the big picture of what I was talking about earlier. It's the what and the how. The board is the what, so the vision, the what do you want to have done? So Andy said a couple times, well, can you do that policy? That's the what. So then what? We're asking him to then do the work, get it vetted, bring it back to the board for the decision, right? So it's the what and the how. It's oversight, not micromanagement. Now, I'm just gonna say, a few of those committees that John was mentioning, and I know John and I are good friends, right? And he knows what I'm saying. It felt like a lot of committees, right? Does the board really need to do all of that? That feels a little bit like getting in the weeds. So what I would just recommend to you is you are oversight. You expect the superintendent to perform on the vision, to develop action plans, to implement policies, and then you hold him accountable. That's exactly what you're doing. And of course, Matt, on your standpoint, with your top people here, you're holding subordinates accountable. You're developing systems for things. And I would like to see the board think about this from a standpoint of you're more concerned about the overall management system than the individual decision. You want systems in place. So for example, the example I would give is like when East China, when I was superintendent, I had 12 different facilities, right? And so I'm looking around and my grass at the schools is a foot high. And so I'm saying to people, to myself, what's going on, right, Bill? But I didn't call the maintenance guy and say, hey, get over and cut St. Clair Middle School. What I said was, what's the system? And he said, well, we got one guy, it's 40 hours a week, this is what works, blah, blah, blah. So why is the grass so long? Oh, he's gone on vacation for 3 weeks. So what's the system for replacing him? Oh, we don't do that. Okay, now I'm at the problem, right? So early in my tenure, I said, I want coverage for my lawns, whether he's gone or not. I want to sell. Oh, okay, we got it. So 12 years later, I always had my lawns covered. So I'm saying that you want systems work. And when you talk to Matt, that's what you're looking for. Now, I'm going to kind of skip over this, but this is similar things that you've given authority to your superintendent through your policies, through your practices, through your action. What about the staff? Is it okay for board members to contact staff? And I mean, the basic answer, if I can jump in, is no. Why? Why should the board not contact staff? Why? Because you're the governing board. You're the board. You have one employee, that's your superintendent. You have issues. I was telling Andy earlier, talk to Matt. Tell him what's going on. Let him work on it. He does that work. So we don't want the organization to have a thing where everyone is going around everyone and you don't have a logical chain of command. So if you're going to be effective, you need a chain of command.
So do we continue to bug Matt with little items? Because of course I'm known as the nitpicker in the district because I complain about a lot of things in the district. So do we continue to waste Matt's time when it could be very easily handled by someone else in the staff? Or do we continue to waste Matt's time and have him call us back and get back to us when he's in meetings and he should be doing other things other than worrying about something that someone else can take care of?
And if you're the nitpicker
Yep.
of the district, do you need to be? Or are
Well,
you
because
on
no
the
one else
governing
is
board?
at this point in time.
Are you on the governing
Let me say only if everyone was doing their job, there'd be no need to nitpick. How's that?
Okay, well, I'm gonna give you the short answer is, yeah, you should be dealing with Matt.
Okay,
I
fine.
get it. I mean,
Fine.
I understand exactly. I
Okay.
had a board president once, Roger, that said, well, I'm good friends with the maintenance director, so I call him all the time. And I'm saying, that's not good. Because you have a superintendent. The superintendent is your contact, and that's what we want. So in my view, and what do you do with, I mean, obviously staff is gonna contact you. Maybe somebody's already contacted you, you guys are new, the fresh blood, they like that, right? And I'm just gonna say, you listen, and then you say, have you talked to the principal? Have you talked to the supervisor? You want to redirect them. One of your big jobs as a board member is redirecting people to where they should go. And that's true with the community as well. I'm not saying you don't listen. I'm not saying you don't respond. I am saying that there's a chain of command that helps with effective organizations and effective governance structure. And here's the other thing, Andy, and I just say to you because you're looking at me now, but you don't have any authority. You don't know all the information. How can you solve it, right? And obviously, I'm not directing this to you, but I'm just saying in general, you don't know. You can't solve it. You're the board. You're not the administrator. So you let the administration do their work. The administration is management of questions and issues. The board is oversight. The board is governance. So that's the point of that. Comments on that?
Yes, Rod, going back to your comment you just made about contacting the administrator, if somebody contacts you in regards, right? A lot of times the reason why people at least are contacting me because they've already tried to contact the administrator and the administrator's not calling them back. They're not getting back. Most likely they're probably not getting the answer that they want to hear. But again, my point being is that's usually why they call a board member because they're not getting success in someone getting back to them in a timely manner in order to answer their questions.
And I say you refer them back. You let them carry their water. You let them carry their burden, because honestly, it's impossible to run an effective organization if there is not a good chain of command. And people need to understand that and deal with that. And I'll just give you one example. For me, was when I was a superintendent, my secretary was gone for a couple of weeks or whatever, and another secretary in the building called me and she says, how do you want your calls? And I'm like, what calls? I don't ever get any calls, And so I started getting all these calls. And so when my secretary got back, I said, how do you handle all these calls? What are you doing? And she said, well, I listen to them and I tell them somebody will get back with them. Then I call the principal and I say, hey, because they said, yeah, they talked to the principal. They said they talked to somebody. But the fact of the matter is 99% of them had not talked to the principal, so the principal made that call back. So to me, there are ways of dealing with this kind of stuff. Andy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, we're all, again, here representing constituencies, voters, members of the community who ultimately elected us into the positions that we're in. I feel strongly that we have an enormous amount of authority as it relates to the voice of this community. Every one of us. We mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we all have very differing viewpoints and backgrounds and life experiences, but different political viewpoints. But there's an enormous amount of authority that is granted to all of us through the voters who ultimately elect us to these positions. And we all have the utmost respect, not only for Dr. Outlaw, but for any superintendent who would serve in the same capacity. But there are also changes that we would like to, in partnership with Dr. Outlaw, with the administration, see happen and to move this district forward. And I think that it's important we don't get, I actually went through and I counted, I think there's 37 slides. 37, we're on a school board. This is a school board. There's 37 different slides that talk about, all policy 2201, 2101, unity of purpose. Employment of CEO, educational, it goes on and on. At the end of the day, members of this community look to us to implement change that positively impacts their life. That's what most of the people in this community seek.
And you do it at the board table. You do it together in collaboration and you're working together. Absolutely, and I think you should exactly do what you're saying. And remember, also, part of your job is educating the community. Of course, I deal with this where a community member thinks you can solve it. Here's what I want. You're my rep on the board, and yet you're sitting there saying, hey, I'm one board member, I'm one of 7, so you have to redirect. You have to help them understand, hey, this is how I can help you.
Well, and if I may on that, I totally agree with you. We come with a lot of authority in the sense that the people elected us and they expect us to work collectively to move the district forward in the right direction. And I think everyone up here fully appreciates that responsibility. I think in the context of what Rod was just talking about, if an issue arises, as you pointed out, Andy, we all come from different backgrounds, different perspectives. We have different viewpoints on how, an issue may, be decided or how it should be addressed. If there's an issue, in the district, 2 of us may have completely different views of how that issue should be addressed. And that's why it's problematic if individually we're trying to say, this needs to be done this way, or, I want you to do this, or, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's where it becomes problematic, because then you lose the chain of command. We don't individually have any authority, but collectively we have a tremendous amount of authority. Right? It's the manner in which that authority is exercised. That's
completely with you, Roger. I think the last comment related to this is you mentioned us educating the community.
Yeah.
I really feel very strongly that I look to the community to educate us. Right? Today society's gotten really sideways where all of a sudden elected bodies are trying to educate the populace when in fact we're elected by the community to serve them, not to educate them. They should be educating us and informing us on ways we can help improve the district.
I don't disagree with you, Andy, but I think one of the jobs is to help people understand how they can solve problems, how they can work within the system.
Fair, that's fair.
We're a system. You guys are a big system. And you've got a governance structure, you've got a team of people, you've got lots of employees. So yeah, there's something to that too. Now, let me ask you a couple more questions and then I'm almost done. We wanted to ask the question, and this comes from Roger asking me, like, hey, what about liaisons, right?
Well, we had it before, and then we got rid of it. We got rid of it.
We did, we did.
And
It's a
then-
lot of committees. I mean, it's a lot of.
Well, and then the question was raised of, maybe this,
Should we
again,
have
talking
that?
about what our roles are, I'm trying to put everything out there for, discussion and so, anyway.
Well, and one of the dangers in liaisons is again, the same thing of chain of command, like who's really in charge. So sometimes people, if they think there's a liaison, they'll go to that person instead of going to the administrator. And so what we want is the board up here, we want the administrators to handle the problems here and people to know what that chain of command is. So that's that.
On that, it wasn't really that. It was more that we had exposure and experience in each building. It wasn't that we were going to have any authority in the building.
Yeah.
It was just that we
So
were
if you-
exposed. So we walked through and then again, have some say if it comes back and, say the principal was talking about something. They shouldn't be afraid to talk to board members to bring ideas and dreams and visions forward because they do need things. Ken Stahl had to have bathrooms at Hilton Elementary. Okay. It was his vision that they had to be replaced. So we agreed to it. Well did. Okay. And we said, okay. So
Yeah.
that's the idea. That was the point of.
Again, there's technique that can be done. I don't think I'd call them liaisons, but I might set up, what I used to do, I used to have board members, go through buildings on a structured schedule, especially new ones. You set up a schedule every month, they go, and there's things that you can do in that regard to get at that thing. But to have liaisons, in my mind, it undermines the principle and the chain of command. How
That's not the
work.
intent.
Now, what about board member badges? You guys have badges, you use them. I don't know exactly, Roger, did you want to speak to that one?
Well, no, I mean, we have badges that provides unlimited access to all buildings 24/7.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And, and so
Is that the way it's set up?
that's the way it's set up right now. I don't know that's,
It
that,
makes me uncomfortable, I'll be honest.
I mean, quite frankly, I can't even tell you the last time I even used my badge because, if I'm going to the school where my child is, I will just buzz in or if I've got a meeting
Right.
with Dr. Outlaw, usually it's by virtual at this point anyway with the, our.
Let's answer. Alicia, why does it make you feel uncomfortable?
Because there is I can't think of any other business that I have been involved in 20 plus years as a grown-up here, where there was a badge that didn't control access based on need. And as a board member, this is the building I need access to. And if I'm going to meet with folks in other places, I can make arrangements for somebody to let me in and I can be logged in as a visitor in those places easily enough. If you come to my place of work, they're not going to, I don't have a badge that gets me into all of the bank's buildings because I don't need to be. I need a badge to the one place where I work
Okay.
and that's it. So that's why it makes me
Other
uncomfortable
thoughts?
that we all have access to
Have you
everything.
guys, Angela, you had any thought on this?
I was actually aligned with that. I have no need to go to the other buildings, and the only one that we really need to be in
Is this just a
touch.
long-standing practice? Because I just can tell you from my experience, no, we did not have that. There's not need for that, so we never had that. People had access to their own buildings. Nobody, except for the top maintenance guy, would have had access to all the buildings.
Is that how it is? I'm not associating with board members with the rest of the staff in the district, but for a teacher, say at Scranton, does their badge only work at Scranton? Yeah.
And the board office, I believe. They're able to,
Sometimes.
sometimes, okay.
Because it depends if we're holding a meeting here, but
Okay.
there's been times we've had to use the key or the buzzer to let them in.
Okay.
So that's a thought. It is a board administrative decision, but I definitely would look at that.
Is there a reason why we need access to, or it's just that it's historically always been the case?
I think it's just a historical
Yeah.
thing.
Just what's the concern or issue with having the access? Like if the access is granted, what's the concern with having the access?
Honestly, it's that access to our buildings should be on an as-needed basis. And if I don't have a stated purpose for being at the high school or at Maltby or at Spencer Elementary, I shouldn't be able to go in there without checking in at the front office.
Yeah, it's a security thing.
It's a security thing. And I mean, like, I have a student at the high school. I wouldn't expect that I can just walk into the high school because I want to. I wouldn't expect that any parent can just walk into a building because they want to. I would expect that everybody that needs to do business in that building either works there on a regular basis, so has a badge that lets them in, or needs to check in at the front office so that we know why you're there and what your purpose is.
Okay.
What's the policy?
There isn't one.
There isn't one, yeah.
And it's on my list.
Well, that's definitely something.
So we'll add that one to the,
All right, that's a good one.
I mean, 'cause
All right.
I-
Let me finish up and get you guys out of here. There's just a couple more slides. So this
Forget
slide
Roger.
is one that I've used for numerous districts, and you had this in your policy earlier, but I kept it in just to show you, it's not just you that has this policy. This is what the law is, that your actions are in the board minutes. That's how you speak. You speak through your board minutes, and you're required to be able to tell how people voted, all your resolutions and actions are in the minutes. You can also include, some things like reports or projects. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but generally it's your actions that's how you speak. And it's not your comments. Now, it's not to say your comments aren't important. They are rich. They fill the discussion. You want just as Andy said earlier, you want the back and forth. You want to listen to each other. But ultimately, it comes down to the vote. So I just wanted to leave that slide in for that point. I got 2 slides left, I believe. This is just the kind of thing that I think you're thinking about. You're trying to be honest and respectful. You're going to be not trying to surprise each other because you're a team. You acknowledge when there was a mistake. You work on the confidentiality and the chain of command. You contact the superintendent when you need to. And of course, you're a problem redirector. You're not really a problem solver because you help redirect and work as a team to solve your problems, not as an individual. And then the last slide is just about your commitments that you're making as a board and as a board member. You are interested in the longer range. I mean, obviously there's issues in front of you. You should not lose sight of that, but you're interested in the big picture. You do keep an open mind as you deliberate, listen to each other. You don't promise things as an individual because you know it rests with the board. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you don't have your own opinion. You certainly do. And it's not to say you can't talk to people and listen to people and share your opinion, but you're always respectful of the board. You are on a team. And then, of course, I think it's important to support the board. So even as you have differences, and I could have differences with you on this, but I would like to see the board listen to each other, vote, and then that's the decision and we move forward and not belaboring whatever issue it is. That's my thought on supporting the board. It's not to say you can't have one opinion. I would never say to anybody, hey, I want you to be 7-0. Don't care about that. Don't care about 7-0. What I care about is supporting the board once you've decided something. That's my thing. All right, that should be it. All right. Questions? I know I went a little bit longer than I said I would, but questions?
So just one quick question for the newbie. You mentioned the reply to all, and in the spirit of allowing you to continue with the slides, on email.
Yes.
So I'm continuing to learn how we, like the communication norms that exist amongst board members. I would just I'm seeking clarification on email guidance through our internal discussion and communication. I was under the impression with coaching from Roger, and don't let me single Roger out here, but
it's okay.
if it's fact-based, we're okay to communicate with one another.
Well,
It's not my opinion. We're asking Dr. Outlaw for an example from a recent communication, what the cost of a particular purchased item of the district
I
is.
always feel more comfortable in individual as opposed to group emails for the purpose of discussion. So it's fact-based for you, but then as soon as somebody replies to that, you've started the discussion. So I do suggest that you email, like if you need to email Roger and Matt, you do that, but you don't email the whole board about something.
So I'll give you another example that's relevant. So I visited a school between the last board meeting and this working session this evening. I would like to continue, as long as I'm a member of this school board, to share with my peers on the school board what I learned when I visited that particular school or another school in the future.
So yeah, I think that's okay, and then as long as the rest of the board doesn't reply to that to all and start a discussion about some point that you made.
And I think that was the coaching Roger provided, which is great.
That's the way
Okay.
I would say.
Okay.
And I will say that Matt does a really good job of sending back out to all of us the information if he's gotten questions from one or two of us, so that we all benefit from the question and the response
That's exactly the
creating
coaching. If
issues.
I had a little more time, I would have said, when you get questions from the board members, he should be allowing all the board members to have that answer. Because we don't want one board member to have all the information, you know? So you get the question to him, he sends it out to everybody, hey, I got a question from a board member. I wouldn't even say which the board member was. Matt, I would
He
just
does
say,
that.
And that's what he does. He just
Yeah.
says, I had a request from a board member for this information.
So
I'm
here
sharing
is.
it to everybody. That's what he
Exactly,
does.
that's perfect policy.
We all know it's Alicia every time. You can tell by the question.
What, any other questions? It's been great to meet you two. I really appreciate it. I know the rest of you, but, thank you so much for having me. I feel honored. You guys know I live here. I don't know if you know, I live in Brighton. Been here for 10 years now. Very proud of the school district. My son bought a house and, you know, we got all of that going on. He's not living here now, but, you know, very proud of the school district having to be here. So
Thank you.
I appreciate your work. I really do appreciate all of your work.
Well, we appreciate the time and effort and insight that you provided tonight, Rod. It's very much appreciated from our end as well. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rod.
Thank you.
So, have we kind of covered the satisfactorily that
So without, obviously,
we're way
way beyond, and this is kind of the email I directed to Dr. Ola earlier regarding just the agenda. But one question that I have, and again, outside of not being able to communicate with this board, outside of this forum, I just have one question as it relates to code of conduct in the school, as it relates to security-related matters. And security-related matters means if, well, we all know and have been exposed to what happened at Oxford, in Oxford, Michigan, where a student wrote down a very visible threat to fellow students. The student was reported to the principal's office, and ultimately parents were brought into the discussion. The student was sent home. The student came back to school and ultimately murdered multiple classmates in the school. And the question that I have is, as a district, what do we have policy that establishes protocol for when a student makes a threat that involves killing another classmate? Is there policy in this district that relieves administration from sitting in a room and determining through dialogue what the response should be? Or is there policy that describes, if someone does this, this is the policy that will be followed within Brighton Public Schools, Brighton area schools?
So we've talked about that. There is not a zero tolerance policy, I think is what you're talking about. There are a range of options when it comes to discipline. Obviously, when it comes to threats, we have very detailed protocols that have been developed in collaboration with our administration, mental health staff, as well as law enforcement when we're talking about the specific issues that you're talking about. But there is not a policy that says you will do step 1, step 2, step 3 as it relates to the student for discipline. But there is a very clear process when it comes to how the district must handle any sort of threat. So, we've had this dialogue. It may be beneficial at one of our workshops, perhaps, to hear from perhaps Officer Bell and Deputy Schuster, as well as maybe somebody from our mental health team that maybe can walk us through what that protocol looks like. I think that would be informative for the board. I think you would be very pleased at the lengths that we go to ensure safety here. So I'd love to come back at it. But to answer your question very succinctly, no, we do not have a policy that says step 1, step 2, step 3.
And my last question related to this subject, are we as a district aware, is the administration aware of the policy that existed in Oxford? I say Oxford because it's a Michigan school and it's a very visible event that happened in the last year. Do we know what the policy of that district was in the context of what you just communicated here tonight about our district policy? Have we looked at what their policy was and whether their superintendent, in partnership with their school board prior to this event happening, felt that the policy they had in place protected them from circumstances like what happened?
Right.
And I ask that in the context of, can we then compare what they had to what we have and ensure that we feel collectively that the policy that's in place in Brighton is a policy that will ensure what happened there, to the best of our ability, won't happen here? Because that particular situation involved discretion of a plethora of staff and administration. And I just want to make sure that we have absolutely looked at what policy they had, compared it to our policy today, and make sure that on a go-forward basis, our policy is taking into consideration whatever broke there to ensure it doesn't break here.
Okay. It's a great suggestion on the policy side of it. We have not looked specifically at their board policies in that area, so that's a great suggestion. We'll do that. But we have looked at their response plans, and law enforcement has reviewed. There's been a lot of learning from Oxford, but I love the idea of looking at their policy, and we will take that suggestion and look into it.
It just seems, Dr. Outlaw, that hindsight is always 20/20.
Mhm.
But if we put ourselves in their school board environment prior to this event happening,
Right.
I don't know. I've not gone back and looked at any of their meetings and et cetera, minutes, et cetera.
Sure.
But I would think the rational person could conclude that they felt as a board and as an administration that the policy that was in place was buttoned up.
Right.
And clearly there were gaps that contributed to the circumstance that happened there. And I just want to make sure, to the best of our ability, we're looking critically at that policy they had and making sure the policy we adopt on a go-forward basis, to the best of our ability, captures the lessons learned that are gleaned there.
And to follow up on that,
Thank
Andy, I think it even goes one step further, because from what I understand, the question is whether the policy was sufficient at Oxford or whether there were failures to follow the policy. I think that was, from what I understand, there were significant failures to follow policy. So I think it's really two steps. One, to make sure we have the right policy, and then the law enforcement protocols that are implemented in accordance with that policy. And then obviously the discussion with, our security folks, law enforcement, as to the fact that this is what's being done to implement and to stay the course consistent with that policy. Because you can have the greatest policy in the world, but if it's not followed, that's where you have problems like Oxford.
Yep.
So
And there's been extensive reflection regarding the missteps and things that should have been done, and the follow through, extensive, from law enforcement, school officials, all kinds of folks across the state at the state level. So there's been a lot of learning with it, but I like the idea of looking at what the specific policy is. So great suggestion. Thank you.
Is that everything, Andy, on your topic?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. John?
I have two pretty important items. I've got some citizens that were, again, this would go against Alicia's idea maybe, but citizens that were interested in safety and things, grandmas and people that have children in Brighton High School, and they've done some research. And I think this would be a perfect one for an ad hoc committee. And I asked Bill Tremblay if he'd be the first one. I'd like to see maybe one of these two ladies on it, maybe yourself. And Andy, maybe Roger's got his hands full, but this particular one was a tour of the schools regarding some things that we can do and what we haven't done, similar to Andy brought up on this very, very important topic he brought up. This one is safety of students as well. But, you know, for instance, vape detectors in the bathrooms, which we don't have. There's a problem with the bathrooms in the high school where the students can go safely and use the restroom. I understand. So the point though is we're here to help with this situation. And I think this ad hoc committee that Rod brought up, this is a perfect assignment for an ad hoc committee. And I have, you know, a list of things, you know, vape detectors, education for parents. I mean, we are behind you guys on a lot of areas when it comes to, we used to have the DARE program, which just barely touched it years ago. They bring out the hot rods and see the kids and try to get them involved. But what are we doing in the middle school? What are we doing at the Maltby, then Scranton, and then the high school? And there's, you know, discussion of, you know, the speakers come in the school and the broad topic of, you know, what's been used in the past and how we might, you know, be able to make it better. But there's no collaborative effort for what I can tell. So that's an area that we could really improve on with maybe one of the ad hoc committees, get behind administration and learn what the needs are. And I mean, parent education is a big thing. They don't, I guess the comment in this was that they met, you know, they meet the parents, but the parents don't know the kids are smoking marijuana until they're told by the school, okay, because they're not in the groove. And so our job is to keep these kids healthy, safe, and this is a big part of it today. When they leave Brighton schools, how do they handle their lives when they go into college, and when they, what kind of risks and risk taking are they doing? So I would like to see our first ad hoc committee, first one, to meet with Officer Christy Bell and these concerned parents and bring back some ideas that we can work on as a group that are, you know, maybe something that, like you said, what has the administration looked at? What haven't we looked at? Not that these are going to be all new ideas, and maybe these things are already being done, but we need to ensure that they're being done. And I can share with you that our officer in charge at the high school would like more outreach to the students ahead of time, ahead of problems, where they get education and balance, and that can happen. And that's in the written document here, and I'll share it with Roger. And it's really well done. And the people involved in this are very well-intentioned community people, and they mean a lot to us. So I'll turn this over to Roger, and he can review it and maybe pass it up to the board if he sees fit. Mind my scribble on it. Yes, sir, Andy.
Just a quick question, Jim. Why do we need a subcommittee to implement vape detectors?
We don't at all. They can be put in right away. They can be done right now.
So
we can do those if we decide.
something we need to vote on, or is that something?
That is a budgetary, even a board consensus that they want them in the school. I think the superintendent can do it. And
So
like-
we have, we've had different quotes. We've had different vendors that come in.
But they're not in the school.
They are not, but good suggestion. I wrote that down on the list.
Here's my-
We'll look into it. And
On that issue though, Dr. Outlaw, excuse me, I apologize in a way. This has been deficient for a long time. Okay, these bathrooms, I stood in the high school, and I'll tell you why you need a badge. I'll tell you why you need a badge. So we're in there, we're swiped in. I'm in there going over to the STEAM Center and working on some stuff to meet with one of our sponsors. Okay. Without any problems. I could have badged in the back door and actually walked in there too, but I usually go in the front door, park out in front, and then go through the administrative office on purpose, just like you said, who's there, why you're there. But I will share with you that I saw the bathrooms lined up by the high school office because of the safety of those bathrooms. And that concerned me. And they were backed out, and the young ladies in the ladies' bathroom, and then even the young men's bathroom, the same thing. And so, you know, I'm a dad, I have 2 daughters, and I recall situations where my kids didn't want to use the restrooms at school, whether they weren't cleaned or different things, whatever it was, but I haven't forgotten it. So in this though, we're looking at positive, and I love the idea of short-term. Maybe this doesn't mean a long-term forever type of committee, but this is one we look at seriously. get it addressed, and make sure that the people in the school know that they can get a hold of the board or the superintendent. But it hasn't been done. This should have been done years ago. This should have been done a long time ago, Dr. Allo, before your time. This is not a new problem. I remember Ken Hammond was our principal, moved up from the middle school. He was dealing with it. And I went in there on a couple different occasions, actually went to the MSP on the deal, and they wouldn't pick it up because it had to be the city of Brighton at the time, because they had to go through the city of Brighton and follow the chain of command. Well, the city of Brighton couldn't get it covered. So this is an overwhelming situation. And we did get another police officer for the high school to assist her, right? We have a liaison officer, which is, I understand, a real good addition for us at the high school. So that's helped balance the load on a 2,000 person building that is a city when it's running. And I give them all the respect that I can tell you. I've known a lot of the liaison officers over the last 3 decades. Some became chiefs of police, right? So I mean, they're good people, but we have to give them the tools so they can be successful. That would be my first one. So if I could get an ad hoc committee on that particular issue, I think it would be a great thing as a board to do that. Consider that. Okay. My next one is it's very serious. We had a situation where one of our 5-year-olds had an adult that actually works for us file a Title IX complaint against the 5-year-old student, which has caused a lot of harm to the 5-year-old. And per the parent coming to my office, and I don't know what to do.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I think we're familiar with the Title IX proceedings that you referenced.
Yeah.
John.
Are we all familiar with it?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak to Ms. Marks or.
Well, the problem is it's continuing.
Okay.
The proceedings are over. The reason the parent came, though, is it's continuing, and that's why she came, and her husband.
And I'm not defending or.
No, I understand that.
Anything else.
I understand.
All I'm saying is there's a process. I don't know. I mean, again, this is like something that's being, discussed for the first time at the board table. Has this been, have you talked to Dr. Outlaw about this?
He's aware of it, fully aware of it. And this district has done what it can do to make it right at this time.
Okay.
But
But all I'm saying is there's also legal implications. I don't want to say I don't want to have something said.
Never. No, I agree.
You know what I'm
But
saying?
in this situation, though, the parents came to me, the mother first, and then the mother and the father of this 4 or 5-year-old son, and said that this just wasn't right. They said that it's created situations where their son is not the same person that he was before this happened. He was isolated from his class, suspended from school, some pretty serious stuff for 5 years old. And it appears that the person who filed the complaint is continuing by telling other people that this situation was real. Now, it's been dismissed. What this parent is asking for, and I think it's perfect for an ad hoc committee again, is I think this would be an ideal situation for 3 board members to meet with this parent and discuss this with her and see exactly what happened and how her son was treated. And I am sincere as I can tell you, it breaks my heart that this happened here, ever, to anyone. So I would support that maybe yourself, Roger, and a couple of board members meet with these parents and see what really happened. And that's our job to see, because it's continuing. And that was the reason they came to me, is that through the person that filed the complaint, who I will add is an employee of Brighton Area Schools, this is continuing. And I'll leave it at that. And I've done what I needed to do. And I'd like that to be considered, in this case alone, that this be considered for a committee, and some 3 people from the board can discuss it, bring it back to the superintendent, we can talk about it. And if everything was done right, then we're all set. But it appears it wasn't, because in the school itself, this is what happened. Under the direction of the principal,
Mr. Conley?
1 second for me. The principal made adjustments to the entire schedule for all the students for the entire grade. So all of the students in that grade were affected by this, not just the one or two. And then this continued on for weeks. Now, there isn't anybody I know that's going to say that this was okay and that the students were isolated. This particular student was put on in his own position or her own position and left in isolation in a way. So I think this deserves a full look at it from the board level, and that's why I brought it up tonight. It's a very important topic. And if we can't cover this and do what's right here, then we're in trouble. And I don't know how it got to this far, and I don't understand any of that, but it did. And it's affecting people's lives, and I took an oath of office to protect them. And I'm here to protect one right now. And that's why I'm here, and I apologize. Go ahead, Alicia.
No, I apologize for trying to interrupt.
Thank you.
I would like to suggest an alternative to what you propose, Mr. Conley, because I do think it's important for us to evaluate our Title IX process and its effectiveness and appropriateness on a regular basis. We had Trune take a look at our board level policies as we adopted them, and we specifically declined to have appeals to the board because we didn't think that as a board we would be qualified to weigh all of the intricacies associated with it. And I would be concerned that if we created an ad hoc committee to look at a particular situation, that might be considered a violation of our existing policy in that space. But I do think the concerns that you raise merit additional review. And I would suggest that the board consider and that the administration look into having our law firm do a review of how this particular case was handled and provide back feedback on whether our policies and procedures were followed, whether there are gaps or holes that could have prevented some of the harm, so that we can learn from that and do better for this student and for future students. Because I agree with you, that is very important. I can't imagine a Title IX situation that isn't going to be delicate and impactful for all of the people involved. And I agree that we need to make sure we are doing the very best that we can in those situations.
Related to that, in the context of the issue that I brought forward regarding the threat of killing another student, were there any students isolated in that particular instance? As you know, John described this particular situation. Were there students that were isolated in that particular situation?
So there was an infraction by a student, and the student that was involved with the infraction the penalty was focused on that individual.
But none of the other students that were in the classroom were isolated in the manner that this particular student's peers were?
No,
Correct.
no, this is a very different situation, and
I
this
understand,
is
but
from quite a while ago. Right.
Yeah, but
Agreed.
it didn't involve the threat of killing another classmate, correct?
No, it did
Correct.
not at all,
Okay.
yeah.
That's all I was asking.
It was a Title IX complaint, and to Ms. Reed's point, I mean, there's very specific.
Yeah.
With a
We-
5-year-old.
Within.
Yeah, and we can get you up to speed. We had a lot of updates and things on Title IX. It's a pretty cumbersome process.
here's
It's
what
pretty
happened.
involved.
Go ahead.
No, and we've been through it, but I'm not trying to underscore that.
No,
Title IX is different.
I have, not an expert on what transpired, but have context into the circumstance. My point is, and I want to take Alicia's advice here, not get into the specifics of the particular situation that John brought up. My point is, it did not involve the threat of killing
Not at
someone,
all.
another student. And I know personally firsthand of a student who threatened to kill another student, and there was not outside of the individual who made the threat, none of the other students in the classroom were affected by that. So it just bringing that up as a point of clarity for the situation.
Well, and again, the point is that the situation happened. It got to the extreme consequent how it was addressed. And then the ramifications for the rest of our students were long-reaching. They no longer could do naps. They were cut out for a minimum, I understand, 30 days. Students couldn't do naps. The students were broken into groups, subgroups, and they called them quadrants. This is through the entire kindergarten program, all students, all classes, because there was this condition present and this threat. I mean, this is almost, you couldn't write this. So how this materialized at this level without the board's knowledge really is concerning to me. We didn't know anything, and we didn't know that that school was put under different rules than every other school we have. It all changed without us knowing. And then the only reason we know was 30 days after the incident or so or more, the parent showed up in my office, just walked in off the street. Okay, that's the only reason we know today, just so you know. And so I'm obligated to bring this forward as an elected official. This is not optional. It was an obligation I took. And it's very hard for me, just so you guys know, it's just like one of them tougher days to think about this. And so we're here, it's up for discussion. I'd like Roger to address it somehow, to put it in some format that the board members look at this, and Alicia's, whatever you guys can talk about it, and we'll figure out a way that fits the compliance of things. This is a board issue. This is definitely a board issue. This flew way over the top of everybody here, including our own administration, once it's discussed later. I don't think there's any support for this kind of stuff from this side of the counter, zero. So thank you.
All right, that concludes everything for this evening. Our next regular meeting will be Monday, February 13th at 7 o'clock, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks. See you. Sorry.